Two iron balls collided with each other with a loud sound. This was clearly not a friendly duel. Several goblins attacked people at once. Someone loudly ordered to stop the monsters immediately. Also, the commander of this group ordered to maintain formation and not to be distracted so as not to die before the battle began. At this time, the man whose face was hidden by the hood stood calmly to the side. This was the main character of this story. He was not at all worried about what was happening and only watched, waiting for the wrong time to act. Suddenly there was a loud explosion which raised thick clouds of smoke into the air. Something bad had clearly happened to the people who were fighting the goblins. The worried commander immediately turned to the necromancer and asked if he could help them as he had promised. The protagonist, pleased that he was finally approached, took off his hood and confidently replied that he would do everything possible because he was a mercenary after all. The next moment the guy used all the skills he had and concentrated the energy in his staff, which was adorned with a human skull. The protagonist grabbed the skull in his hand and used the summoning ability to help people. At that very moment several armed skeletons appeared out of nowhere and fearlessly rushed into battle. The summoned creatures did not waste time and entered into battle with the goblins, giving the people the opportunity to retreat. The knights who were watching what was happening were very surprised because they had the opportunity to see the power of the necromancer who had recently become the strongest. Now the men understood why the leader of their group was so relaxed. The thing was that he hired such a strong man to go through this dungeon. The main character heard all these words well and was very pleased with this, considering that this was exactly the status that suited his unique authority as a necromancer. Among almost 8 billion people, only about 1,000 people had such skills, and because of this it was a very rare profession. The necromancer was able to summon creatures that were completely subservient to his will and would unquestioningly carry out any orders. However, the main character could only summon skeletons, although they were quite effective, but they were the easiest creatures to summon, possessing rank E. They were quite effective for fighting goblins, but were not good for anything else. These skeletons had various skills in handling weapons, so there were neither melee fighters nor archers among them. Very soon the job for which the guy was hired was done, so he put his hood on his head, thinking at the same time that he was just an ordinary necromancer. The rest of the people envied the guy because even though summoning skeletons was the most basic skill for a necromancer, thanks to it one could easily pass in a rank dungeon. The main character's name was Zhu Donghun. He was a cursed rank necromancer by profession. He was the one who controlled the souls of the dead and could defeat his enemies using terrible spirits and poisons, but everything was not so simple. Zhu Donghun was cursed because he could only summon skeletons. This made him very upset and made him envious of ordinary people. About 10 years ago, people began to receive unique abilities from the moment they reached adulthood at 20 years old. The content of these unique abilities was completely random. For example, some people received abilities related to blacksmithing or sewing. Others received auxiliary abilities such as scouting, healing, or improvement. Since all these abilities were given just like that by random probability, it was obvious that not everyone liked them. However, thanks to these abilities, humanity was able to survive the sudden invasion of monsters. In any case, now the main character was a necromancer that everyone envied. The skeletons he summoned easily dealt with a whole crowd of goblins, leaving the people unharmed. The knights who hired Zhu Donghun for this job could not contain their joy because with such an assistant they would not be in any danger. The guy himself was not very happy with his situation because of the curse he could only summon rank skeletons, which meant that until his death he was destined to only go through easy dungeons. After some time, the main character had already returned from the mission and reported to his leader that he had finished his work for today. The man who was sitting at the table was very surprised that everything was done so quickly. Zhu Donghun said that he had completed the party's mercenary mission in the A-rank dungeon and made a report. After this, the guy bowed respectfully to his boss and informed him that he was already going home. The man said goodbye to his valuable employee and wished that they would see each other later. Going outside, the main character exhaled heavily because for now he had nothing to be happy about. Another working day was over, which meant the guy could think about his life. Zhu Donghun walked along the busy street and thought about how ridiculous this world was. The guy was only glad that his skills were so bad that people did not have any hopes for him. His skeletons could certainly successfully fight goblins, but this was not enough to achieve success as a necromancer. The main character has already regretted more than once that he was given such an ability. In his opinion, it would have been better if he simply had a production-type ability. Then the guy looked at his phone and thought that even after he became a necromancer, his salary for today after running around the dungeons was only 40,000 won. It was so ridiculous that Zhu Donghun himself found it funny because he could probably earn more with a part-time job. However, being a necromancer was the only thing the main characters wanted to do. He couldn't just give it up. Walking down the street, the guy suddenly heard the loud voice of a news anchor who happily declared that the news today was good. The Dark Lord who managed to clear the lunar rift last time became a ranker in just 3 years of active life, and thus there were now officially 37 rankers in South Korea. In addition, this was the first time that a hunter became a ranker in just 3 years, and this was an indication of how strong the necromancer's ability was. Zhu Donghun was shocked to hear this news, and for some time he couldn't take his eyes off the big screen because he had his own reasons for this. This was one of the many things that drove the main character crazy. The guy really didn't like this successful necromancer who received his ability on the same day as him. It so happened that one of them was a cursed necromancer who could only summon skeletons until death, and the second one meanwhile had already become a ranker. This made the protagonist burn furiously with rage caused by the injustice of fate. Despite the late hour, Zhu Donghun was in no hurry to go home because he had another very important matter planned for today. The guy came to a spacious training ground where no one could interfere with him or see his inept ability. He understood perfectly well that this unfair fate was his reality with which he had to come to terms and adapt. The system window reminded him every time that he could only summon skeletons, but this did not mean that he should be offended and sit idly by without even trying. Zhu Donghun once again used his abilities and called all of his skeletons to appear. At that very moment, 3 otherworldly entities were placed in front of him, and the system window notified him that the first effect spent 10 energy to summon a regular skeleton and could summon up to 10 at a time. The second effect allowed each skeleton to be named. Zhu Donghun was very surprised when he read this message and learned about this possibility. The protagonist had never encountered a skill with such a description and therefore assumed that it could be something special and unlike others. However, the guy quickly lost all his enthusiasm because he realized that all of these were just his empty hopes. Nevertheless, the main character called the skeletons and, having joyfully greeted them, advised them to warm up a little and forget about weak tendons. Meanwhile, Zhu Donghun was thinking about what he always received from them, and the same skeletons no matter what time he summoned them. The first was a skeleton with a huge sword who was always the first to enter the battle. The second was a skeleton with a long spear which could keep the enemy at a distance and not let him get close to him. The third was a skeleton with a bow. He stood behind and always shot accurately but caused very little injury. However, this did not mean that they all should not train. The protagonist demanded that they give their full attention to this matter. Sitting on the sidelines and watching this training, the guy always put in a lot of effort to achieve the result. The main character really wanted his summoned creatures to become stronger and was ready to try for this. At first, the result of all these efforts was clearly visible to Zhu Donghun. Skeletons that had difficulty dealing with even one goblin could now easily fight 3 such opponents at once. However, the skeleton's rank did not rise any higher. No matter how hard their training became, they did not become stronger even with a crank teacher. Because of this, the main character was absolutely depressed and believed that his life was completely worthless. However, the guy had nothing else to do, so he continued to waste time without getting any results in return. The only thing that encouraged Zhu Donghun was the words that the one who lived without a dream was more pitiful than the one who kept a dream that he could never realize. Meanwhile, the main character was looking at the glowing eyes of a dangerous monster from the bushes who did not even try to hide his presence. The guy immediately heard someone's loud growl behind him and cautiously turned around, not looking up to see who else was there besides him. Zhu Donghun was very scared when he saw the one looking at him from the darkness. He clearly didn't expect to see this. The huge foot of the green monster took a step forward with a crash, no longer intending to hide in the bushes. The monster's bright eyes continued to glow in the darkness, and its bestial grin spoke of ill intentions towards the main character. Zhu Donghun was dumbfounded with fear and silently looked at the monster that suddenly appeared, not believing that it really was an orc. The guy was very scared because he didn't understand why this monster was here. The next moment, he began to receive system notifications that his skeletons were suppressed by the presence of a powerful creature, and because of this all their indicators were reduced by 20%. The main character was very unhappy about this and called his subordinates a bunch of useless bones. After that, the guy thought that the appearance of an orc here only meant that a dungeon breakthrough had occurred somewhere nearby. A dungeon break is a phenomenon where an uncleared dungeon breaks down for some reason and releases monsters beyond its boundaries. While Zhu Donghun was thinking about all this, the orc had already raised his huge axe to attack the guy intending to kill him. The main character saw this and was very afraid but did not believe that he would die here. The next moment Zhu Donghun placed his last hopes on his weak skeletons and loudly ordered them to block the orc's attack. The skeleton wielding a long sword obeyed its master without question and stood between him and the ferocious monster. The orc seemed very surprised by this attempt at resistance, but he felt that the skeleton was no match for him. That is why the monster easily threw two skeletons aside so that they would not interfere with him doing what he had planned. Immediately after this, the main character received a system notification that the first and second skeletons had been recalled, which did not make the guy happy at all. Now no one was hindering the Urku and he could easily chase after Zhu Donghun, who in this difficult situation could only run away. Suddenly out of nowhere, a saving arrow appeared, piercing the air with great speed and flying forward. Unfortunately, it didn't do any damage to the orc at all, but it distracted him for a moment. The guy immediately realized that it was the work of the third skeleton archer. The main character mentally begged his subordinate to do at least something because even with such a miserable life as his, he still did not want to die. Having moved to a safe distance from the monster, the guy stopped and began to think that he had 70 units of energy left, which meant he could summon 7 more skeletons. Therefore, Zhu Donghun immediately used his skills and summoned 2 normal skeletons to at least try to defeat the orc. After that, the guy quickly gave the order to the skeleton with a spear and the skeleton with a sword to attack the monster, while the skeleton archer was to attack from afar. Despite the good plan, these measures did not stop the ferocious monster at all, who at first easily dealt with the first enemy, destroying him with just 1 blow. Although Zhu Donghun understood that his summoned creatures were weak, he did not expect that they would be destroyed so quickly. After the second skeleton was destroyed, the protagonist decided to call 2 more subordinates and run away to a safe distance in order to use his abilities again later. Zhu Donghun repeated these manipulations several times, thanks to which he managed to stay alive for a long time. However, all this took a lot of strength from the guy, which is why he now felt incredibly tired and was breathing heavily. At the same time, the orc remained just as ferocious and had no intention of giving up on his intentions regarding Zhu Donghun. The system informed the guy that he had used up all his energy and advised him to rest in order to restore it, which of course was unrealistic under these conditions. Zhu Donghun felt hopeless, but he still tried to do something. He still had 3 skeletons left standing between him and the ferocious orc. The monster seemed to understand well that he only had to defeat 3 weak opponents in order to reach his cherished goal, and therefore was not going to stop. The main character also understood this, which is why he was very afraid. I think that this was the end for him. It was at this moment that the guy received system notifications which said that he should check the messages about the achievement of the conditions. Zhu Donghun noticed that it had appeared some time ago, but he had no chance to check it now. However, the boy saw that he had reached the hidden condition, which was the rule of 10,000 uses of the rank normal skeleton summoning skill. The main character was very surprised when he saw that a bright aura had appeared around him because he didn't understand what all this meant. Soon the guy received a notification in which the system congratulated him on increasing his level and promised that he would soon receive his reward. The main character saw this as an opportunity to save his life and therefore became very enthusiastic. Meanwhile, the orc was already swinging his axe to attack another skeleton, and at that very moment all of Zhu Donghun's spent energy was restored as a reward. In addition, the cursed necromancer's skill changed to the skill of summoning a normal skeleton of rank D, which caused his subordinates to immediately begin to exude a bright aura. The skeleton swordsman immediately decided to test his new powers and took up arms to confront the ferocious monster. This time he managed to block the monster's attack quite effectively, which greatly surprised Zhu Donghun. The guy immediately noticed that his subordinate's strength was completely different from before. Since the main character's energy was fully restored and was already 100 units, he decided to try his new skill with great enthusiasm. The guy quickly summoned 2 more skeletons to help the ones he already had, after which he received a notification that the main weapon for the new subordinates had been chosen. One of them used a massive shield as his main weapon, which allowed him to protect himself and the other skeletons. The second skeleton wielded a small wand with a bright crystal on the end. Zhu Donghun was surprised that his new subordinates could obtain unusual weapons. They were now an attack warrior who could absorb damage and a mage. Now the 5 summoned skeletons formed a stable group that was capable of confronting the monster. The skeleton with a shield in his hands decided not to stand aside and quickly went to help his comrades. At this time, the skeleton with a sword and the skeleton with a spear successfully held off the orc's attacks. The monster was surprised that his opponents suddenly became much stronger, and therefore this fight no longer seemed like an easy walk to him. However, the orc was not going to give up, but instead decided to attack what he considered to be the weakest skeleton. The next moment, a crushing blow from a huge axe fell on the skeleton holding the shield, although it did not cause any damage. Instead, the weapon jumped out of the monster's hands and flew far away, leaving its owner defenseless. This surprised the orc very much, but it was not the end. Everything was still ahead. Soon the monster saw a huge fireball flying towards him, which only caused him bewilderment. The orc did not understand where this danger suddenly appeared from. It turned out that this was the work of a skeleton mage who used his first-level skill and mercilessly attacked his opponent. In addition to the fact that the monster was now on fire, the skeleton with a long spear dealt him another blow, piercing his head with his weapon. Only after this, the lifeless body of the orc fell to the ground with a crash. Zhu Donghun, seeing this, could not believe his eyes for a while. Soon the guy received a system notification that he had defeated a strong orc. All the skeletons immediately looked at the main character, waiting for his further instructions. Zhu Donghun was still shocked and couldn't even move because he thought that his life would end. However, the sight of the slain monster made the guy believe that his victory was real. Now the guy was smiling broadly and assumed that the world didn't want to see him die yet. After some time, Zhu Donghun finally returned home, and the first thing she did was have delicious instant noodles for dinner. At the same time, the guy carefully studied his characteristics in the system and could not believe what he saw. He could not even imagine that his abilities could grow. Still, he happily accepted it as a fact and continued to think in that direction. Now the main character knew for sure that the conditions were always rewarded without a doubt, which is what happened quite recently. The guy didn't know when he would be able to reach rank C at this rate, but he was still happy with what he had now. Then the main character, with a smile on his face, suggested that he should go back to basics. He was impressed by the strength of the intermediate skeleton, but now Zhu Donghun was interested in what would happen if his summoned creatures became even stronger. The main character began to assume that perhaps the skeleton mage would begin to use a skill called Snow Blizzard. It was also very likely that the attacking skeletons could become true masters of the sword and spear. In any case, Zhu Donghun was very happy with this prospect and had already decided that he definitely had to reach new heights. The next day, the main character as usual came to work at the guild, where his colleagues were already discussing the troublesome matter. They believed that in addition to the insurance premium, there should also be payment for danger. However, people were attracted by the high price of the order, so they were willing to work even as porters for that kind of money. This conversation attracted Zhu Donghun's attention. Then the guy noticed a green icon which indicated that its owner had a C rank. The main character did not understand what such a high-ranking hunter was doing here. The guy was distracted from these thoughts by a familiar voice that addressed him. Zhu Donghun's boss happily informed him that he had big news. The guy began to listen attentively. The man began to say that this news seemed to the Parang Guild, which once founded Jipparang. Everyone in Korea knew about this prestigious guild, which was founded by the Korean rentier Jipparang, also known as Fine Bao. The man continued to consider that this guild was going to explore new dungeons and they needed porters. This job paid very well, namely 10 times the stated amount. Zhu Donghun was very surprised to learn that the reward for this quest was so high. The boss then said that this clan even hired a rank people, so the main character should try his hand because the other tasks were completely crap. The guy was in no hurry to agree and decided to first see what kind of dungeon it was that the clan was going to go to. The man opened the map and said that this dungeon was recently discovered under Payu and was quite difficult. The boss then regretfully stated that 5 teams had already failed to pass it, which could not help but surprise Zhu Donghun. The man also said that the difficulty level of this dungeon had not yet been determined, but it was already clear that it was a very dangerous place. Despite this, the boss was happy because all the teams that tried to pass it were newbies, but this time the famous guild Parang entered the matter. That's why he believed that this time everything would go well, and the main character wasn't worth worrying about at all because he would only be a porter and he wouldn't even have to fight. The boss had already prepared a contract and again insisted that the guy should just do his job and get paid for it, which was as easy as pie. Despite the man's optimism, Zhu Donghun was in no hurry to agree and was meticulously thinking about how he should act. The guy assumed that the tenfold reward for this task was connected with the great danger in an unspecified dungeon. At the same time, the main character was still mentally exhausted after his meeting with the orc yesterday, so it was dangerous for him to take on such a task. However, the mysterious task that promised a great reward could not simply leave the guy and tempted him. Zhu Donghun recalled that the necromancer here had said something similar in his interview. He claimed that in order to increase one's rank, one had to go to a dungeon above one's level. According to the Dark Lord, the higher the rank of the dungeon, the more dangerous it was, of course, but this also meant an abundance of opportunities and rewards. Having finished thinking about all this, the main character confidently took the contract from the boss and agreed to join this business. The man was very happy about this and praised the guy for not missing such a chance. While signing the contract, Zhu Donghun asked when he should set out. The chief said that the execution of this task would begin in a week from Paiyu Station. Zhu Donghun didn't mind this, but he wanted to take a week off to prepare for this adventure. The man was not against this and thanked the protagonist for his participation, promising to treat him to food in return. That was how Zhu Donghun signed his next mercenary contract, but this time the mission looked much more intriguing. The main character did not waste time and immediately began his training in order to fully master his new powers by the appointed time. The guy was able to summon his skeletons without any difficulty, of which there were now 5. They all wielded unique weapons and were a well-balanced team. Zhu Donghun couldn't be happier about this because his new summoned creatures were completely different from the previous skeletons. The guy thought that his training had finally paid off. The main character also hoped that with his persistence and determination, his skeletons would become even stronger over time. The guy then suggested that if his skeletons continued to train in the same spirit, he would soon be able to become a ranker, so he ordered the 2 creatures to take their places. Zhu Donghun was currently planning to see what his Drank skeletons were capable of and couldn't wait to see the results. The next moment, the skeleton wielding a long sharp sword was able to cut through the wooden training dummy with one blow, indicating that his strength had increased significantly. The next one to demonstrate his skills was the skeleton wielding a spear. One of his attacks was able to pierce through the dummy. The main character also had to check the skeleton of the archer. The summoned creature quickly pulled the bowstring and fired an arrow at the target. The skeleton's strength was so great that his arrow was able to easily pass through several thick trees at once and continue on its way forward. Seeing all this, Zhu Donghun was amazed and could not believe that this was the power of a Drank creature. The guy thought that they were almost as strong as Crank. The main characters of course knew that his skeletons had become much stronger, but he had not yet realized how much. After that, the guy began to think that first he needed to change his training equipment because now the wooden dummies were useless for his summoned creatures. To his great disappointment, Zhu Donghun felt that he would need to spend even more money. However, he was very happy that his skeletons had become much stronger and therefore he was ready to do anything for the sake of their effective training. Now the only real problem for the main character was himself. The guy was worried that during the battle a powerful enemy could choose him as its target instead of the skeletons. In this case, it will no longer matter how strong the main character's summoned creatures were. Suddenly something interrupted Zhu Donghun's thoughts. He looked away in surprise. The boy saw one of his skeletons who was wielding a magic staff. For some reason, he was slowly approaching the necromancer. Unexpectedly, the skeleton mage pointed his staff at Zhu Donghun and began to use his magical abilities. The main character was very surprised by what was happening and even a little scared because he did not understand what all this meant. Suddenly, the guy felt strong currents of wind around him, which surrounded him from all sides, which surprised him very much. Zhu Donghun couldn't understand what had just happened and even assumed that his skeleton had somehow read his thoughts. At the same time, the creature seemed to be happy. The next moment, the guy felt as if lightning had struck him from the realization that his subordinate had just been able to respond to his thought. The main character was very surprised by this because before the skeletons only followed his orders, but now they could express their opinion. The creature confirmed this with a gesture. Then the guy began to think about what kind of ability the skeleton mage used on him. I assumed that it was some kind of air shield. Zhu Donghun did not notice that another subordinate was approaching him from behind. Suddenly, the skeleton, who was holding a large iron shield in his hands, slammed it onto the ground with a loud crash. The main character, very frightened, turned around sharply without realizing what had happened. The guy saw his skeleton in front of him, which was moving its jaw as if it was trying to say something. After this, the summoned creature pointed its hand at the broken training dummies. Zhu Donghun was very surprised and did not understand at all what his subordinate wanted to tell him with all this. After some time, the skeleton that wielded the iron shield took a fighting stance as if preparing to repel someone's attack. Suddenly, a skeleton wielding a long sword attacked his comrade with all his might. It seemed as if the creatures were arguing over something. After this, a whole hail of arrows fired by the skeleton archer flew at the skeleton with the shield. Despite the unexpectedness of this attack, the creature managed to react in time and defend itself from the deadly arrows. The skeleton itself, after several strong attacks from its opponents, remained safe and sound. It was fully prepared to continue this battle. Zhu Donghun watched all this with great admiration, thinking that it was all very good. The guy continued to watch his subordinates, thinking at the same time that if a skeleton with a shield helps him with training other skeletons, then he won't have to buy additional equipment. Suddenly, the boy turned to the skeleton who owned the spear and asked him to try to attack him. The creature was very surprised by such an order. Zhu Donghun intended to test how safe the air shield that the skeleton mage created was and whether it could protect him. The skeleton spearman did not argue with his master, and as ordered attacked the main character with all his might, but his blow was stopped by an invisible wall. Zhu Donghun was scared because he didn't fully believe that the air shield's protection would be enough to stop the skeleton's attack. Nevertheless, seeing the excellent result, the guy was very pleased and now had no doubts about the skills of his skeleton magician. After this, the main character praised all his subordinates and ordered them to continue training because he needed higher achievements. A few moments later, the skeleton swordsman had already attacked Zhu Donghun, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't destroy the air shield that protected the boy. At the same time, the spear skeleton successfully trained together with the shield skeleton. They both received only benefits from this. Zhu Donghun, watching everything from the side, was very happy because this training was going well. Suddenly, the guy received a system notification that the strength, physique, and magical power of his subordinates began to increase. The system also congratulated the protagonist on the fact that thanks to the first growth after awakening, the status window was unlocked. Zhu Donghun did not yet understand what this all meant. Soon the guy saw a status window of one of the skeletons which described his characteristics. The main character immediately assumed that his other subordinates had similar status windows. As it turned out, the guy's assumption was absolutely correct. The windows contained information about each skeleton, starting from their unique abilities and ending with various indicators. Zhu Donghun immediately noticed that due to training, the performance of his first 3 skeletons was different from the performance of the subordinates he had acquired more recently. This was very inspiring for the main character because now he was absolutely sure that all his efforts made up until then were not in vain. Now the main goal for the guy was to train the skeletons and comprehensively develop their skills. All the summoned creatures looked attentively at their master, as if they were very happy to see his enthusiasm and therefore were ready to unquestioningly carry out all his orders. Zhu Donghun had already decided that she was training her skeletons to become the strongest in the world. The main characters trained hard for the very day that soon arrived. The guy came to the right place and took off his heavy backpack in order to rest a little. Today he had to complete a relatively simple task, but the place he was heading to was shrouded in secrecy, so preparation was not superfluous. The main character took with him a sleeping bag and more than enough food in case of emergency, because he didn't know what could happen to him along the way. Of course, this time he would have to be just a porter. Completely different people took part in the battle. However, since the guy was a mercenary, he had no intention of giving up the job, considering that it was all important. Suddenly, a man addressed the participating mercenaries and loudly asked them to come closer and follow the instructions. He asked the people to wait at the entrance to the dungeons because they were planning to enter inside soon. Zhu Donghun looked at the entrance to the dungeon and thought that it was located next to Paiyu Station, and already within a radius of 200 meters dim energy emanating from it was visible. The hole that was inside looked like an ordinary dungeon that had arisen naturally. Some people looking at this began to get very nervous because their guesses that this was a very complex dungeon were confirmed. One of the guys heard that the thicker the color around the entrance to the dungeon, the higher the chance that it was very complex and dangerous. However, people believed that since the Parangam Guild was with them, nothing bad should happen. At the same time, Zhu Donghun, looking at the entrance to the ominous dungeon, thought that the large guild did not guarantee their safety at all. That was why he really didn't like people talking about how the Parangam Guild could protect them from any danger. The guy knew well that in this world there were many dungeons and countless hunters who had disappeared into them forever. All these victims and inglorious deaths were overshadowed by the luxurious spotlights of the rankers, so few people knew about the number of those killed. However, despite this, the main character was confident in himself and had long ago decided that he would go there despite the great danger. Zhu Donghun was going to put his life on the line and risk everything for the opportunity to become stronger. While the main character was thinking about all this, he did not notice that some girl appeared behind him. She turned to the guy, which scared him a lot because of its unexpectedness. Zhu Donghun immediately turned around and was very surprised. There was no one in front of the main character. The guy didn't understand what was happening because he had definitely just heard someone's voice. Soon the mysterious girl's voice appeared out of nowhere again. She stated that she felt drank energy but nothing more. Zhu Donghun still didn't understand what was happening. In addition, the girl noticed that the main character had a practice on his belt which indicated that he only had an E rank. The surprised guy looked around, not understanding who was talking to him, and at the same time the girl was wondering who Zhu Donghun was. The main character was also interested in who this girl was, which he immediately asked her about. She was in no hurry to answer because she had asked the question first. She was also interested in why the main character hid his abilities from Parang and decided to participate in the campaign only as a porter. The worried Zhu Donghun assumed that there was some kind of misunderstanding and could not understand how the girl even noticed such details. The protagonist knew that Parang was full of A-rank hunters and therefore did not understand what the problem was with him being a drank but having an A-rank badge. Meanwhile, the girl continued to say that seeing the expression on the guy's face, she began to suspect him even more and assume that he was a spy who had taken an acting course. The girl also claimed that Zhu Donghun was too frivolous about Parang's intelligence capabilities, and therefore he would not be able to hide the fact that he was a spy sent from another guild. Finally, the girl stopped hiding and showed herself to the main character. She was very serious and looked at the guy with a stern look. Zhu Donghun was shocked to see this girl because he immediately understood that she was far from an ordinary hunter. The guy noticed that she had a gold plate on her belt which was only given to hunters of S rank and above. This meant that this girl was the very first rank among the 37 ranks of South Korea. She was called the Dark Empress and her name was Ji Soyul. Zhu Donghun was shocked because he knew that this girl was the head of the Parang Guild and was Jiparang's only younger sister. With her unique ability to kill, she was the #1 person who should not be angered. Because of this, the main character was now very scared. Despite this, the guy was very happy that he had the chance to talk to the ranker whom he had long admired. Without wasting any time, Zhu Donghun turned to the girl and said that she had misunderstood everything because he was definitely not a spy from another guild and only had a D rank. The guy continued to say that the rival guild must have been very large, and therefore there would be no need for them to use a hunter like him. Ji Soyul silently listened to Zhu Donghun's excuses, but it turned out that his words were not able to convince her at all. Suddenly the girl began to smile and try with all her might to hold back her laughter. Still, she began to ask the main character for forgiveness with a smile and explained that, to be honest, she was just joking and of course did not suspect him of anything. Zhu Donghun was shocked because he never expected that the same Dark Empress could behave in such a way. Zhu Donghun stared at Ji Soyul and couldn't understand why someone like her class would play a prank on someone. At this time, the other hunters noticed the presence of the Dark Empress and, unable to contain their admiration, began to discuss her appearance here. At this moment, the main character realized what had happened, which made him feel uneasy. The guy assumed that she had made inquiries about him, since training with a skeleton could certainly attract the attention of rankers. However, Zhu Donghun felt that in any case this was a good opportunity to earn the attention of the famous Dark Empress. Ji Soyul noticed that the guy was not himself, so she smiled good-naturedly and assumed that he was upset because of what she did so unexpectedly. Then the girl again apologized for being rude to the main character Zhu Donghun. This discouraged him even more, and so he didn't even know what to say. Ji Soyul continued to say that she was interested in the fact that the porter with the E rank badge had a skill that allowed him to place 5 D rank energies inside himself. Of course, the Dark Empress felt the energy of the skeletons that the necromancer Zhu Donghun summoned. There was nothing to say because the girl was indeed right. Suddenly, the main character was visited by a thought that greatly disturbed him. The guy realized that all this meant that the girl had sensed his power through energy detection. Ji Soy-yul seemed to smile slyly because she understood what the main character was thinking and knew the reason for his worries. She went on to say that her older brother had asked her to join the second team's expedition as a scout, and so she was looking for a porter. Just at this moment, a suspicious porter appeared on her path which she couldn't just pass by. Zhu Donghun became very tense because of these words. Suddenly, the Dark Empress began to approach the guy, preparing to ask him something. Still, she asked if Zhu Donghun was willing to volunteer even though the job was a bit dangerous. The girl was sure that with such skills the guy was the most capable among all the porters. Also, Ji Soy-yul, without taking her eyes off the main character, said that he would definitely not be scared and would not run away. Zhu Donghun was of course glad that the Dark Empress herself thought so highly of him, but the oppressive feeling of danger still did not leave him. Suddenly, Ji Soy-yul patted the guy on the shoulder and said that she had confidence in him because she had a keen eye for people. The girl also promised Zhu Donghun double pay for doing this work. The guy was shocked by the fact that not only was this an expedition into a dungeon with a famous ranker, but it also gave a double reward. Of course, Zhu Donghun couldn't refuse, and without thinking twice, he gave his consent to the girl's proposal. The main character was very pleased because he believed that he simply could not miss such an opportunity. The dungeon had its own ranks which depended on the difficulty and went from E to S. This rank was not set by the system, so humanity had to subjectively evaluate and determine the danger of each specific dungeon. Famous rankers claimed that unfortunately there was no way to find out the rank of a dungeon in advance, so you just had to go in and check it yourself. There was a tip that was to check the brightness of the color surrounding the dungeon. The darker it was, the more likely it was that the dungeon was of a higher level. However, even this method was not entirely accurate, and so the association had to establish a standard. If the dungeons could not be passed by even 5 or more hunters of the same rank, then his level would increase. There were also times when even 5 or more rank hunters took part in the study but were unable to pass it. In this case, the corresponding dungeon stopped at S rank. Of course, in the end, this method inevitably required someone's sacrifice. The unranked dungeon that the protagonist was about to enter was something like this. The guild couldn't just send its main forces there, so first a reconnaissance team was sent into the unexplored dungeon. Thanks to this, Zhu Donghun could smell the air of the dungeon much closer than the other mercenaries. Having fearlessly passed through the energy barrier, the guy immediately received a system notification that he had entered the dungeon. Looking around, the main character realized that it was a rather spacious cave. Luckily, people had no problem seeing thanks to the luminescent pearls which emitted a bright light in the dark. One of the hunters thought that if they took this pearl and sold it, he would receive a decent amount. His comrade reminded him that people died when they carelessly touched suspicious objects in the dungeons. Zhu Donghun watched his colleagues from the side and noticed that they all relaxed when they entered the dungeon, although this was not surprising. Everyone present here except the main character had an A rank badge which indicated that they were already quite experienced and strong hunters. Suddenly, Ji Soy-yul turned to her comrades and asked them not to relax and to prepare for possible surprises. She then said that first the swift blade and the small fire had to inspect the surroundings for 1 cycle. The boys obeyed this order without question. After this, the Dark Empress turned to the guide whose name was Kong Sun-wook. The man in the construction helmet began to listen attentively to the girl's order. Ji Soy-yul asked him to look for an exit and cover the porter. The man knew that he would be asked to do this. Then he said with a satisfied smile that he would carry out this order, otherwise he would no longer be able to call himself a guide. This slightly unusual nickname was given by the system because the person was exceptionally good at finding his way around dungeons. Such people were very important during the exploration. After all the orders were given, Ji Soy-yul suggested to her comrades to hurry up and set off. Suddenly, the guide turned to the main character and asked if he was nervous. The guy honestly answered that he really was. Hearing this answer, the man suddenly asked for Zhu Donghun to continue to be nervous. The main character was very surprised by this because usually in such situations more experienced people calmed those around them. The man began to tell that there were more than 1 or 2 suspicious things in this dungeon. The guide believed that the Dark Empress was not angry when she asked her subordinates not to be nervous. It was already possible to say that this dungeon was too quiet and its structure was simple. There was also a high probability that there were no monsters here at all. Kong Sun Wook thought so because if something lived in this small cave there should have been at least a slight ringing or sound or vibration. That is why the man could safely assume that something else could be hidden here. Zhu Donghun was surprised that the guide could make such conclusions even before the exploration. The man confidently confirmed this and explained that he had been working in the dungeons for many years. After that, Kong Sun Wook asked the protagonist to follow him. He was going to follow the order of the Dark Empress and look for a way out. Zhu Donghun understood that he and the guide were moving in the opposite direction from the other hunters and hoped that everything would be okay. For some time the guide and the main character walked in absolute silence, not lagging behind each other even a step. Suddenly Kong Sun Wook broke the silence by saying that he was scared. Zhu Donghun was surprised to hear this. The man was worried that they had not encountered any traps or clues along the way, and this was what made him feel afraid. Then he turned to the Reaper and asked whether he felt heaviness in his body or if this sensation was only his. Zhu Donghun honestly replied that he had an unpleasant feeling about all of this, so he doubted whether they should continue on their way. Kong Sun Wook agreed with the main character because he also felt like this for the first time. The man continued to say that even meeting the rancor did not cause such feelings in him. Zhu Donghun was very surprised by these words. Kong Sun Wook then said that he had a feeling that there might be some kind of weird creature hiding in that dungeon. That is why the man advised the necromancer to call his subordinates while there was such an opportunity, because if it came to battle the guy would at least have a chance to escape. The excited Zhu Donghun decided not to ignore this advice and immediately put his skills to use. Zhu Donghun took hold of his staff and immediately began to concentrate energy into it in order to use his necromancer ability. The next moment 5 armed skeletons appeared in the cave ready to carry out any order of their master. The main character spent half of his energy on this call, but he considered that his safety was worth it. Kong Sun Wook upon seeing the skeletons immediately asked if the guy had anything better in his arsenal. Zhu Donghun replied with annoyance that he could only summon these creatures, and there was no point in hoping for more. Suddenly Kong Sun Wook felt a very unpleasant feeling, the reason for which was somewhere ahead. The next moment he began to close his mouth and cough violently. Surprisingly, the summoned skeletons did the same. The protagonist did not understand what was happening. The guide did not explain anything and only ordered the guy to continue moving forward because there was open terrain there. Zhu Donghun did not understand why they needed to go there. The man himself did not know this, but he felt the presence of several creatures ahead, and if there was someone there then this place was suitable for life. Kong Sun Wook didn't know for sure whether these creatures were the previous human teams or monsters, but they definitely needed to move forward faster. Zhu Donghun tried to keep up with the guide, although it was difficult to do so under such conditions. The air in the cave was clearly filled with some kind of gas because the guy couldn't even keep his eyes and mouth open. Each next step became more and more difficult for the main character. It seemed that, if he lifted me right now, he wanted to destroy the uninvited guests. Suddenly the skeleton mage used his air shield skill in the hopes that it would somehow help Zhu Donghun. A moment later the system notified the guy that the first level air shield had been shattered. The reason for this remained unknown. To add to all the other problems, the main character's condition rapidly worsened. He suddenly began coughing up blood. In order to continue moving forward, Zhu Donghun needed help. So he turned to one of his subordinates. Only by relying on the skeleton was the guy able to continue moving forward, thinking along the way that the pressure in the cave was enough to destroy the skill at the moment of its use. After that, he turned his attention to Kong Sun Wook, who had already gone far ahead and clearly had no intention of waiting for his partner. Zhu Donghun was dissatisfied and didn't understand whether all of this made any sense at all. He didn't believe that this dungeon really turned out to be super high difficulty. However, the protagonist decided that he first needed to survive. Despite the danger he faced in this cave, the guy still wanted to become a rancor. That was why Zhu Donghun continued to take one step at a time despite the enormous effort it required. He hoped that the danger would soon pass. Suddenly, the main character, along with his skeletons, passed through the invisible barrier. Only after that did the guy feel relief and was able to breathe freely. The system notified Zhu Donghun that he had reached the stage. She was called an elderly man with white hair filled with deep resentment. The guy was very surprised by this. Looking around, the main character saw a spacious room in the middle of which some kind of seal was burning with a bright light on the floor. The system continued to tell that the old man's resentment was so deep that icy frost formed on his hair. That is why the main character was asked to enter the room and defeat this old man. Seeing all these notifications, Zhu Donghun immediately guessed that this white-haired old man was the boss of this dungeon. The guy was distracted from these thoughts by someone's loud voice which was happy about the appearance of people. The main character was very surprised by this. Looking to the side, he saw several men, one of whom could not believe that the hunters had finally arrived. He asked if our heroes were from the attachment team. Zhu Donghun guessed that these people were the hunters who were trying to escape the pressure and reach this place before them. Unexpectedly, the famous noticed the purple badge of the guide Kong Sun Wook and were very happy because it meant that the man was an rank hunter. They also couldn't help but notice the skeletons, which is why they decided that a rescue team had actually come to help them. People began to beg Zhu Donghun and Kong Sun Wook to save them and get them out of here, but first give them at least some food and water. The man, without wasting any time, approached the main character and suggested that he start by distributing food to those in need. Zhu Donghun was a little unhappy that the guide had abandoned him not long ago and ran away to save himself. However, the guy understood that this was exactly how the dungeons were arranged, so he did not raise this issue. Then he shared his supplies with the people. Judging by the greed with which people began to drink water and eat, they have been in this trap for quite some time now. Kong Sun Wook and Zhu Donghun did not rush the people, because they understood very well what a terrible situation they found themselves in. The main character looked at the victims and thought that just because of one wrong decision he could have ended up the same way as them. Kong Sun Wook asked people to take their time and eat more slowly so as not to harm themselves. After that, he asked the man to explain what happened here and how they ended up in this trap. One man from the group of victims volunteered to speak on behalf of his entire team. He showed his B rank badge and said that among the survivors here he was the highest ranked. After that, the man began to tell that this place was a real hell. He had been hunting for a long time but had never encountered such a strange dungeon. The first oddity was that there was no exit from this dungeon, and Kong Sun Wook himself had noticed this a long time ago. The man continued to say that from the very beginning they tried to explore all possible paths and find a way out. However, no matter which way they went, this cave always led people to a large wooden door. In this dungeon, people clearly felt that they were tightly bound by a mysterious aura and could not just leave. The man then went on to say with obvious fear in his voice that in the end all they could do here was challenge whatever was behind that door. However, he warned our heroes that the level of difficulty was insane. The man did not understand at all how anyone was able to defeat what was hidden behind the door. The survivor believed that the old man with white hair, who was full of deep resentment, was impossible to defeat. In a confrontation with him, the rank of the hunter was not important at all. All of them were like babies to this old man. Suddenly the man became enthusiastic because he thought that since they now had an A-rank hunter with them, the result would be different. He then turned to Kong Sun Wook and asked him directly if he could pull them all out of this hell. The man was in no hurry to give his answer. At this moment, Zhu Donghun had a question about the survivor's story, so he decided to ask it immediately. The guy asked why the victims were still alive because according to them the dungeon boss was very strong and would definitely not give them mercy. The survivor thought that this was a very good question and decided to answer it with pleasure. Tuskina said that surprisingly this mysterious old man did not kill people. He simply accepted applicants. Could be said that the boss of this dungeon was conducting some kind of test. Zhu Donghun was very surprised to hear this. The survivors did not know the exact details of this test because the old man simply beat them. After that, he looked closely at his opponent as if trying to assess his skills. The dungeon boss didn't see what he wanted, so he annoyedly told each of the men that they weren't suitable. After that, he threw them back out the door so that they wouldn't bother him anymore. This was the first time Zhu Donghun had heard that there was a dungeon boss that didn't kill people. This made this place seem even stranger. Suddenly, the main survivor began to reflect on the fact that this old man was still human. This was the first time that the dungeon boss was a human since the world changed, which couldn't help but surprise everyone present. Zhu Donghun was also shocked and didn't understand if it was even possible for a human to be the boss of a dungeon. The survivor stated that this was the first time the dungeon boss was a human since the world changed, which could not help but surprise everyone present. Zhu Donghun was also shocked and didn't understand if it was even possible for a human to be the boss of this dungeon. Be that as it may, the main character understood that now they had to open this door and complete the task to find a way out of this dungeon. However, the boy did not trust Kong Sun Wook at all, even though he was a high-ranking hunter with a specialization as a guide. The guy began to think about what he should do in this situation. He was interrupted from these thoughts by a familiar female voice which addressed the guide. Turned out that it was Ji Soi Yul along with her subordinates. The girl asked our heroes what they were doing here. Soon Kong Sun Wook had already told the guild leader everything he had managed to find out about this dungeon. The girl thought for a while. Still, she decided that they needed to enter the door right now. Judging by their auras, the girl was sure that the survivors were real people and all this was not a trap. She was only worried about the strong aura coming from behind the door, but she felt that they couldn't just sit here idly. The survivors were very happy and thought that they were almost saved. The people sincerely thanked the Parang Guild and promised to bow to the guild headquarters every morning. After that, Ji Soi Yul turned to the porter and the survivors and asked them to stay here while she and her people took care of the boss of this dungeon. Zhu Donghun was very pleased with the girl's determination and believed that he should not expect anything else from a ranker who was among the top 1,000 hunters. Ji Soi Yul made the final preparations, but she was already confident that all this would not take her too much time. Full of determination, she suggested to her comrades that they set out to meet danger and therefore from now on they had to be on their guard. The Dark Empress took hold of the iron door handle and pulled it towards herself. The wooden door creaked open. An ominous aura immediately poured into the room where our heroes were, which did not frighten the girl and her subordinates at all. Some time passed. Zhu Donghun sat silently to the side and humbly waited for at least some result. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a loud sound was heard which slightly frightened the main character. The next moment, a swift blade and a small fire literally flew out from behind the door. Judging by their appearance, they had been hit hard by the dungeon boss. Immediately after them, a mysterious force also threw out the wounded Ji Soi Yul, who did not expect this at all. The girl hit her back against the wall with a bang, and now she needed some time to come to her senses. Meanwhile, the mysterious door that led to the gray-haired old man slowly closed, so that no one would disturb the boss's peace anymore. Zhu Donghun, seeing all this, was shocked and did not understand what could have happened behind that door. The guy looked at the wounded hunters and thought that not even 10 minutes had passed since they opened the door and went inside. Besides, it was hard for him to believe that an rank hunter was taken out so quickly. Ji Soi Yul was very angry because the dungeon boss told her that she was not suitable. Then she turned to the porter. Zhu Donghun didn't understand what the girl wanted from him in this situation, so he began to listen to her carefully. The Dark Empress asked the protagonist to give her a high-level potion from his bag because she intended to recover and return to the boss. The guy was very surprised because he didn't believe that the girl was going to go back in there after she was beaten so badly. The main character still got the potion but asked if Ji Soi Yul was sure of her intentions. The girl confirmed this and added that the survivors were right because the old man did not kill her but simply beat her. The guy didn't understand how this changed the current situation. The Dark Empress took the potion in her hands and explained that now she was full of determination. The girl thought that she had to show all her abilities so that after that the dungeon boss would accurately determine whether she was suitable or not. Hearing all this, Zhu Donghun thought that the term suitable was usually used when a master was looking for a disciple. If this was really the case, then the old man's dissatisfaction could be explained by the fact that he could not find suitable talents. While the main character was thinking about all this, Ji Soi Yul had already finished drinking the recovery potion and was ready to open the mysterious door again. The Dark Empress confidently headed towards the dungeon boss. I hope that this time she will succeed. This is how the endless test of Ji Soi Yul began. The dungeon boss could not see in the girl what he needed. Despite constant refusals, Ji Soi Yul continued her unsuccessful attempts to defeat the gray-haired old man, but it all ended the same way. After another lost fight, the girl began to get very angry because all this had already begun to irritate her. She did not understand at all why the old man was exactly like that and what he wanted from her. She was also irritated by the fact that this impudent old man, in addition to the sword, was also quite good with a spear, which made him an even stronger opponent. Despite her failures, Ji Soi Yul once again intended to fight the dungeon boss, confident that sooner or later she would be able to achieve what she wanted. Zhu Donghun watched all this from the side, but he had no intention of interfering in what was happening. However, the protagonist's thoughts about this changed. when a whole day had already passed in unsuccessful attempts to defeat the dungeon boss. Even after 4 days, Ji Soyul did not stop challenging the impudent old man, although each time it became more and more difficult for her to do so. The girl could not believe that her opponent could also use magic. She did not understand whether anyone could cope with him. Zhu Donghun believed that they were in a very serious situation, and even if Jipperang himself came to save his younger sister, they all would not be able to avoid problems. The protagonist had a feeling that even 5 rankers who would attack at the same time would not be able to defeat this old man. Unexpectedly, Ji Soyul admitted that her opponent was indeed very strong. However, the girl assured that as long as she was alive, she would continue to challenge him. Zhu Donghun was very impressed by the Dark Empress's persistence and felt that this was the very thinking of a ranker. That is why the main character was now getting to his feet, because he no longer wanted to sit and wait for the others to solve the problem that had arisen. At the same time, the guy thought about how, having failed to clear the dungeon, the survivors stopped fighting and just waited for help. Of course, the main character was also upset by the current situation, but it even gave him strength. Zhu Donghun was certain that he shouldn't just wait here doing nothing. To the guy's surprise, all the hunters who were currently in this cave had already passed through that mysterious door and returned with nothing. Only the main characters had not yet tried their hand at this battle and therefore intended to correct this injustice. Swift Blade noticed that the porter who had been sitting diligently all this time was now intending to do something. This made him wary. Ji Soyul also noticed this and therefore turned to the guy with confusion and asked what was the matter. Zhu Donghun hesitantly replied that he thought he should also try to fight the boss of this dungeon. The Dark Empress was very surprised to hear this, because she did not believe that the porter really decided to enter the dungeons where even the rankers could not cope. Swift Blade was also surprised, because I think the guy was just a novice necromancer who could only summon skeletons. It seemed that the man was even offended by this, so he said that the main thing for him as a hero was to behave like a rapist and just carry their bags. After that, he looked at the guy with an angry look and demanded that he know his place. At the same time, the Swift Blade had already taken up his sword in order to teach Zhu Donghun a lesson for his overconfidence. The main character, seeing this, began to get very nervous, because he did not expect that his words could offend the ranked hunters. Suddenly, Ji Soyul calmly ordered his subordinate to stop and not do anything hasty. The girl then turned to Zhu Donghun and asked why he wanted to fight the dungeon boss, while assuming that the guy for some reason did not trust her. Ji Soyul turned to Zhu Donghun and asked why he wanted to fight the dungeon boss, while assuming that the guy didn't trust her for some reason. The main character immediately began to deny this assumption and said that this was not the case at all. Then the girl reminded him that according to the original contract, the guy was a porter and could not express his opinion about the exploration of the dungeons. Zhu Donghun remembered this well. Hearing this, the Dark Empress continued to ask the guy about the motives for his unexpected decision. She asked why the protagonist wanted to challenge their original contract. Then Zhu Donghun recalled the dungeon boss's words about looking for a suitable person. The guy believed that the dissatisfaction with the old man could be connected with the search for a worthy student in who should have potential. This student did not necessarily have to be perfect. In other words, there was no talk here about the current level of mastery. Ji Soyul, hearing all this, assumed that the main character intended to make the old man his teacher and not defeat him. Zhu Donghun confidently confirmed this and then thought that this might be a hidden condition. Sometimes dungeons had alternative routes through them that were made possible by discovering a hidden condition. Ji Soyul thought about it and seemed to realize that the protagonist was actually right about the hidden condition to some extent. Then she asked how the guy was going to become the old man's disciple. She also asked if the main character really wanted to say that he had more potential than she did. Zhu Donghun noticed how the Swift Blade was looking at him angrily, and therefore felt that it was becoming more and more tense here. Still, the guy replied that he strongly doubted that he had more potential than Ensranker. However, Ji Soyul noticed that the main character did not deny this, which she did not particularly like. Zhu Donghun immediately began to make excuses and say that the girl had misunderstood everything. The main character began to prove that everyone present had already experienced pain during the battle, but not him. Because of this, the guy had a feeling as if he was superfluous here. Also, Zhu Donghun reminded that the girl was currently on break, and so this was a great opportunity for him to try his hand. Ji Soyul, who had been staring at the protagonist until now, trying to understand his true motives, suddenly began to smile. After that, the Dark Empress left the guy alone, thinking that only now he showed his true face. Zhu Donghun did not understand what the girl meant. Ji Soyul continued to say that she knew about ethos from the very beginning. The guy still didn't understand anything. The girl recalled that she had considered him suspicious from the very beginning because he had eyes like a wolf on the hunt. She then suggested that the protagonist wanted to get a reward in the dungeon and hoped for a successful meeting during the raid. Zhu Donghun didn't respond to this, but he thought that Ji Soyul should have been working as a fortune teller and not a ranker, since she had absolutely accurately determined his motives and desires. This made the guy feel uneasy because he didn't understand how a girl could so quickly read a person just by looking at him. Still, the Dark Empress allowed the main character to test his strength because they had no other solution anyway. The girl also claimed that she was not one of those who simply slandered people, because in the end she also failed during the battle with this dungeon boss. Zhu Donghun was very surprised that he was still allowed to test his strength despite the contract. Ji Soyul insisted that the guy only had one chance. The girl also drew the main character's attention to the fact that they were running out of food and the rescuers were in no hurry, so they needed to quickly deal with the situation that had arisen. Zhu Donghun, having received the approval of the high-ranking hunter, immediately bowed respectfully and thanked everyone present for their trust. Without wasting any time, the guy decided to head towards the dungeon boss. His confident look indicated that he intended to win here today. Then the main character silently approached that very door. Despite everything, it was quite an exciting moment for him. Finally, he grabbed the door handle, which indicated that he was not going to back down from his goal. At this point, the system informed the guy that he could challenge the scene when he opened the door. Then she asked if the main character wanted to open this door. Still, the old wooden door creaked open, allowing Zhu Donghun to enter the dark, gloomy room. The system notified the guy that it was a scene of an elderly man with gray hair filled with deep resentment. His resentment was so deep that icy frost formed in his hair. Suddenly, the main character was blinded by a bright light that came from a system notification which informed him that now the guy needed to defeat the old man. Soon the bright light disappeared. Zhu Donghun looked around but saw nothing but an ominous aura that was flying in the semi-darkness. Then the guy decided to take a few steps forward in order to provoke at least some changes in this room. Suddenly, the main character fell to one knee as if showing respect to the old man who lived here. After that, a rough voice was heard from the darkness, which was unhappy that first a nasty girl had come here, and now an even more pathetic guy had come to him. The old man decided that he shouldn't even look at this, and therefore he should just get rid of the uninvited guest. The next moment, the dungeon boss's eyes lit up with a bright light. He was about to strike down Zhu Donghun. The main character, seeing this, was very scared and did not know what to do. Just at that moment, he received a notification that in front of him was a memory of a damned soul. These were the hidden conditions for the unique ability of the cursed necromancer Zhu Donghun, which made him very surprised. The system also informed the boy that the necromancer was ultimately in control of the dead, and so once he reached the hidden condition, he received the S-rank memory restoration skill. The main character was very surprised when he received a skill of such a high level and even thought that he was sleeping because in his opinion all this could not be real. However, the guy continued to receive messages that he was using the S-rank memory recovery skill right now. Zhu Donghun was initially very surprised by this, but he remembered that the old man had threatened to get rid of him but had not done anything yet. Soon the guy was illuminated by a bright light, and the system reported that the process of restoring the memory of the damned soul was almost complete, and therefore he would soon be transferred. It was hard for Zhu Donghun to think about all of this because now he was only concerned about the bright light that was almost blinding his eyes. Suddenly, the main character saw a small white snowflake that appeared out of nowhere and fell onto his hand. Looking around, the guy realized that right now he was in the epicenter of a real snowfall, which couldn't help but surprise him. The same old man who seemed not to notice the main character at all was also here. He didn't understand why there weren't any suitable candidates here, but he thought it was too wasteful to leave so easily. The elderly man continued to regret how meaningless his life was because he worked hard to get here and now he was being asked to give it all up. Meanwhile, a cold wind ruffled the hair of the main character, who still did not fully understand what was happening. The guy looked around and couldn't believe what he saw and cautiously assumed that it was another world. Zhu Donghun found it hard to believe that other worlds really existed. Suddenly, the main character was taken aback by the unexpectedness because he felt a strange feeling. After that, a sharp pain pierced the guy's head. He finally realized that all these were the emotions and memories of that old man. At this time, the elderly man watched the snowfall and thought that he had had quite an interesting life after all. During this long time, he managed to be a swordsman, a spearman, an archer, a magician, an assassin, and try out many other roles. The old man believed that when a person knew how to control the flow of chi energy, then all techniques became a single whole, and therefore it was possible to experience a lot. Zhu Donghun looked at the old man and thought that he had overcome a lot and lived for a very long time, but even chi energy could not stop his aging. The old man continued to regret that now drinking cold water for him was like swallowing poison, and the air which was once light now seemed to be pressing on him, wanting to kill. The elderly man looked at his hands, which were shaking from the cold, and thought that his life was now excruciatingly painful. Suddenly he squeezed his hand tightly because the thought occurred to him that he couldn't just die like that. The old man thought that it would be too unfair to die now. This thought seemed to give him strength, causing his eyes to light up with rage. Suddenly the elderly man fell to his knees because he was very sorry about his life. The old man really wanted to find at least one student to whom he could pass on his ability. He did not understand how there could be no one with a worthy talent. Now the old man admitted that his idea of a single successor was nothing more than his senseless greed. Zhu Donghun silently watched the events unfold. Now he understood why the dungeon boss was so eager to find a worthy person. Meanwhile, the elderly man continued to talk about how he could no longer live like this. Bitter regret made the old man shed a single tear which slowly rolled down his cheek. Soon she quietly fell to the ground, melting the cold snow beneath her. Yet, in a fit of despair, the old man decided to sell his soul just to leave his name behind. After this, a strong wind arose, and a system notification informed the protagonist that the effect of his memory restoration skill had ended. Zhu Donghun once again found himself in a dark room filled with an ominous aura. At this moment, the main character realized what had just happened to him. The guy looked around and recognized this place. It was the very lair of the dungeon boss, which was hidden behind the wooden door. The protagonist looked forward to find the old man, but a strong gust of wind prevented him from focusing his vision. Suddenly the guy fell to his knee and grabbed his heart because he was experiencing very unpleasant sensations. The system informed him that the master of all techniques was looking at him. Zhu Donghun realized that he had returned to that very dungeon, but he did not understand why it was so stuffy here. This made it very difficult for him to breathe. Despite the current situation, the main character was not at all discouraged and tried to cope with the unpleasant feelings. After what he saw, the guy had hope, which couldn't help but make him happy. Suddenly, from the darkness, the rough voice of that same old man addressed Zhu Donghun. The elderly man was very interested in the fact that the main character managed to look into his soul. Zhu Donghun stood up and confidently confirmed this, hoping that it would influence further communication with the dungeon boss. Then the main character looked fearlessly at the old man and thought that he was really looking for a student. This elderly man had in the past possessed great power and knowledge which he wished to pass on to another person. Zhu Donghun had already decided that he had to be this person, and for this the guy was ready to do everything possible. Suddenly the old man declared that apart from the fact that the guy was a little interesting, he had nothing that could withstand his techniques, so the training was useless. After these words, Zhu Donghun once again felt an unpleasant sensation that brought him to his knees. This was how the old man influenced the uninvited guest. Despite the direct refusal, the main character was not going to give up his intentions and loudly asked the elderly man to listen to him. The guy warned that if he continued in the same spirit, he would never be able to find a student and would forever remain a ghost, unable to cope with his resentment. These words outraged the old man, so he called the guy an impudent brat. He then said that he spared many people only because of his boundless generosity. After this, the old man asked if he really had to break the main character's leg so that he would come to his senses and show respect for him. Zhu Donghun, very frightened by these threats, asked the master not to rush and listen to what he had to tell him. The guy started saying that the old man had mastered all the techniques while other people in this world were trying to master at least one and were spending their entire lives on it. The ghost did not believe in this because he knew well that the world was huge and time was eternal, and therefore there must surely have been at least one more genius like him. Then Zhu Donghun asked the old man to remember the girl who came here before him. She was one of the strongest in this world. Hearing this, the elderly man was very surprised and then thought about the guy's words. In fact, becoming a ranker like Ji Soy Yul was the main character's ultimate goal, so the old man's reaction touched him. Still, Zhu Donghun decided not to think about it for now because he believed that, in any case, the old man had already swallowed his bait. Still, the master said that it could not be that this girl was one of the strongest in the world given her level of skill. Then the old man suggested that the guy was simply deceiving him. Then the main character loudly asked the old man to look into his eyes because they were not at all like the eyes of a dishonest person. The guy knew that the master would immediately understand if he was lying, so he persistently asked him to look into his eyes. Soon, to his own surprise, the old man realized that Zhu Donghun had indeed spoken the truth and felt very sorry about it. After that, the guy said that if there was no one who could meet the old man's high standards, then he could use him. The elderly man was very surprised to hear this proposal, but seemed to think about how realistic it was. Then the main character directly asked the master to pass on his abilities to him. The old man realized that the boy wanted to become his student, and because of this he considered him shameless. Then the master said that it would be better for him to teach trash and not the main character. Zhu Donghun, hearing this very rude answer, did not lose his composure and stated that he did not ask the elderly man to teach him specifically. After that, the guy quickly used his skill and summoned all possible ordinary skeletons at once. The main character then stated that if the old man really was a master, then he would definitely be able to see the potential of his subordinates. The elderly man began to stare at the summoned skeletons and think about something. It seemed that he was seriously considering the guy's proposal. At this time, Zhu Donghun thought that the evolving skeletons had enormous potential, so the old man should definitely agree with his idea. The main character also said that each of his subordinates had their own unique abilities, and therefore it would be a little easier for the master to teach them. The elderly man took his time with his answer and looked at the skeletons carefully. He was seriously considering the necromancer's proposal. Meanwhile, the guy continued to say that he would be the only one who would inherit all the knowledge of the old man if he suddenly did not want to share it with anyone else. In addition, Zhu Donghun insisted that his skeletons did not feel pain and therefore they had more stamina than anyone else in addition to their fearlessness. The elderly man listened attentively to all this but was in no hurry to give his final answer. Suddenly he turned his back to the skeletons as if he no longer wanted to talk about this topic. Zhu Donghun was already noticeably nervous as he was afraid of the worst, but he decided not to rush and wait for the old man's direct answer. Finally, the master began to say that all this was funny and even ironic. What amused him was that the successor he was looking for was not a human but an undead whose potential was truly enormous. The old man then suggested that in life all these skeletons were exceptional warriors. He always wanted to have such students, but they only came to him now. After that, the ghost took a few steps forward, saying along the way that teaching more than one student was difficult for him. However, the old man agreed because he felt that he had to compromise. At that moment, a strong wind arose around. At the same time, Zhu Donghun received a system notification that he had managed to fulfill the hidden condition. This couldn't help but shock the guy. Looking around, the main character saw that he had once again moved to the other world, which was now dominated by snow and cold. The older man then turned to the boy and said that he would trust his words and believe in the determination in his eyes, but in return Zhu Donghun had to promise something. The ghost asked that the main character, no matter what trials befell him, inherit everything he owned and leave his mark on this world. Zhu Donghun confidently promised that he would not miss the once-in-a-lifetime chance and would definitely inherit everything no matter what. The elderly man took these words with great joy and praised the guy. Immediately after this, the main character received a system notification that he had cleared this scene. After some time, Zhu Donghun slowly opened his tired eyes and saw a bright white light coming from an electric lamp. The guy was lying in bed, and I still can't remember what happened to him or where he was now. Suddenly, he heard a familiar voice which was happy that the protagonist had finally woken up. Zhu Donghun was surprised, but he didn't expect to see anyone here. The main character also looked around to understand who was here besides him. His eyes still didn't see well because they weren't used to the bright light. Finally, he realized to his surprise that Ji Soyul was standing in front of him safe and sound. After this, the guy began to wonder where he was at all. Judging by the surroundings and clothes, the main character quickly realized that he was in the hospital. Meanwhile, the girl asked permission to introduce herself again and said that her name was Ji Soyul. She was the vice guildmaster of the Parang Guild. She was also known as the Dark Empress. The girl said all this with great displeasure. Zhu Donghun knew all of this, so now he was only interested in why the girl was here and what she was doing in his hospital room. The main character did not remember at all what happened after clearing the dungeon, so he assumed that at that moment he lost consciousness. Ji Soyul started to say that she was very surprised because she thought that the boss of that dungeon was impassable. She still couldn't believe that the porter was the one who was able to defeat this boss. It was obvious that the girl was very unhappy about this. Zhu Donghun noticed this and therefore was now very worried and afraid that Ji Soyul would take out her resentment on him. All that the main character directly asked was why the girl was looking at him as if he was guilty of something. The guy quickly changed his words and said that he was just curious why the deputy guildmaster of one of the largest guilds came to him. After thinking for a bit, the girl replied that it was obvious because she was also curious about what happened in the dungeon. Then she directly asked how exactly the guy was able to pass this absurd dungeon and what reward he received for it. Also, Ji Soyul was interested in whether the main character could really become that old man's disciple. Zhu Donghun was in no hurry to answer but instead thought that the girl's questions were justified because this dungeon belonged to her, and he was given only one opportunity. That's why, from Ji Soyul's point of view, the guy was just a random person who stole her achievement. Zhu Donghun was sure that a more cruel ranker would have probably beheaded him by now for stealing his loot. An unexpected girl interrupted these thoughts by asking what the porter was thinking so deeply about. The protagonist agreed to tell the Dark Empress everything, but before that he asked what they wrote in the news about the exploration of this dungeon. The girl said that they informed everyone that the advance party of the Parang Guild had successfully cleared the dungeon and forced all the survivors to sign a non-disclosure agreement. Zhu Donghun, upon hearing this, was very happy that the public did not know that it was he who cleared this dungeon. After that, he bowed respectfully to Ji Soyul and thanked her for taking care of him. The girl was surprised by this and thought that the guy was much more mature than he seemed because most hunters would kill for the opportunity to boast of their achievements to the whole world. Zhu Donghun responded with a smile that for him safety was above all else. Hearing this, Ji Soyul said that the guy shouldn't have thanked her because for the Parang Guild this was another source of pride. The girl continued to say that in any case no one would believe that an rank mercenary became the hero of the expedition. These words did not please Zhu Donghun at all. Now the guy understood that the guild kept this a secret because it embarrassed them, and if he revealed the truth to the whole world they would probably deal with him quietly. After that, the guy turned to the Dark Empress to ask her one more thing. Ji Soyul was ready to answer all the questions. The main character asked how long he had been unconscious. It turned out that 3 days had already passed since they left the dungeon. Although it was quite a long period of time, the guy was happy that he had a good opportunity thanks to Ji Soyul, but he still wasn't going to talk about rewards so as not to put himself in danger. Zhu Donghun then stated that to be honest he himself still didn't know anything about his rewards for completing the dungeon and therefore he needed time to answer the girl's questions properly. Ji Soyul had no reason to distrust the protagonist, but his words still seemed a bit dishonest to her. Zhu Donghun continued to ask the girl to give him some time to figure things out. The main character also asked her not to worry about him running away because he knew that no hunter in this world could hide from the eyes of the Dark Empress. Ji Soyul didn't answer and looked at Zhu Donghun intently, as if she was trying to find out whether he was lying to her or not. Still, the girl said that she appreciated the guy's cooperation and added that she would return when he completely sorted things out. After that, the Dark Empress walked out of the hospital room and closed the door behind her, leaving Zhu Donghun alone. Only after this was the main character able to breathe a sigh of relief because now he didn't have to worry about anything. Then the guy thought about how his life had been simply exciting lately because a lot of unusual things had happened to him. Besides, Zhu Donghun could end up on the wrong side of Parang if he wasn't careful, but at the same time he could build a good relationship with them. Suddenly, the protagonist received a system notification that he should check his rewards. Zhu Donghun was very surprised by this, but quickly remembered that he had fainted at the time and therefore did not have time to check the rewards. As soon as the boy accepted the rewards, he received an increase in energy reserves by 20 units and a new skill learning all strength techniques. The main character was very surprised that he received another high-ranking skill, and now he already had 2 of them. The protagonist could hardly contain his joy and now understood why all the hunters were so obsessed with completing dungeons. Then the guy began to think about his memory restoration skill. He was glad that thanks to it he was able to read the old man's memories, but he was not very impressed by it. In any case, Zhu Donghun was confident that he would find another use for this skill someday. After that, the guy looked at the description of the skill learning all techniques and was dumbfounded with surprise because it had as many as 4 effects. Without thinking twice, Zhu Donghun suddenly stood up because after receiving the information he no longer intended to stay in the hospital. The guy didn't forget to take all his things with him so as not to return here again and not waste precious time. After some time, the protagonist had already arrived at his secluded training ground in order to test his new high-ranking skill in action. It seemed that the guy was hesitant at first and therefore could not decide to use his ability. Still, Zhu Donghun put his hand forward to use the skill teaching all S-rank techniques. At that very moment, a huge glowing sphere began to appear in front of the guy, which seemed to absorb the surrounding energy into itself. The main character watched what was happening intently, trying to understand whether it was really what he had assumed. Soon the light coming from the sphere began to fade, due to which it was already possible to discern the dark silhouette of some mysterious person. It turned out that it was the old man from the dungeon, who was now very happy that Zhu Donghun had finally summoned him. That same old man from the dungeon was very happy that Zhu Donghun had finally summoned him with his new high-ranking ability. Zhu Donghun was dumbfounded in surprise when he saw the master, because he couldn't believe that his skill allowed him to do this. Suddenly, the elderly man hit the main character hard on the head, calling him an idiot along the way. The old man was very unhappy that the guy, after promising that he would inherit everything, called him only a few days later. The master also said that if the main character was so lazy, then he definitely wouldn't be able to withstand his training. Zhu Donghun asked the old man to calm down and explained that he had summoned him as soon as he came to his senses. After that, the guy began to wonder how this old man hit him and how he could physically influence this world, being only a spirit. Unexpectedly, the older man said that he had expected such a reaction, and therefore the guy still had a long way to go because his facial expression was easy to read. The old man continued to say that he and the main character were mentally connected, so he had no difficulty in using pain on him. After this, the master suggested that they immediately begin training since they did not have much time. Zhu Donghun was very reluctant but agreed to this. The guy asked if he should have called his skeletons now. To his surprise, the old man replied that there was no need for that yet. The elderly man suggested first deciding what the boy would learn today, since he already understood the talents of those skeletons very well. Now the master thought that they should solve the problem that was in the main character. Zhu Donghun was very surprised by this. The guy did not understand at all what problem the old man was talking about and assumed that he was going to pass on his knowledge to him too. Suddenly, an elderly man asked the main character if he knew why he was called the master of all techniques. Without waiting for an answer, the old man said that he received this nickname after studying and perfecting countless talents. Then the elderly man, with a satisfied smile on his face, said that he would be able to teach the main character the basic techniques. Zhu Donghun was very surprised by this because he did not expect that the master would seriously take up his training. He found it hard to believe, so he asked if the old man no longer considered his skills to be trash. Suddenly, the old man loudly slammed his foot on the ground to interrupt Zhu Donghun's speech. After that, he also loudly ordered the guy to shut up, which really discouraged the main character. The angry old man then declared that since the boy had made a promise to him, he should have inherited his skill. The old man also assured that he could use one of his arts to make trash comparable to genius, so the main character just had to try hard. The master thought that it was very good that he could exert physical influence on Zhu Donghun. At the same time, the guy was not at all happy about it. The old man then said that he had several arts in his arsenal that he had created himself, but he was never able to use them. The old man insisted that the main character's body would improve if he massaged it for 300 days. It would hurt, but the guy had to cope with it. Zhu Donghun didn't object to this, but he didn't understand why the old man was so happy to set a price for him, even though he wasn't the owner of his body. After this, the excited protagonist turned to the master and said that he did not feel that his heart was ready for such training. The master again loudly demanded that the guy shut up, after which he asked if he knew how many people wanted to study with him in the world where he came from. Then the old man began to talk about his technique, which was called the Great Technique of the Heavenly Master. He created this art in the last years of his life after much thought. Zhu Donghun was surprised, but he didn't understand why the old man hadn't used it before. After all, it was a technique that could turn trash into a genius. The elderly man understood perfectly well what the main character was thinking, so without waiting for questions, he explained that for this technique, he had to use his life energy as payment. The old man continued to say that if he were to change the talentless student and increase his strength, then the moment he did so his body would melt and disappear. Hearing this, Zhu Donghun asked without any enthusiasm what would happen now in that case. The master assumed that since he was already dead, everything should have gone well. The guy thought that this was a very convenient way of thinking. After this, the protagonist asked if the old man couldn't take any of those hunters who tried to challenge him and use this technique on them. Unexpectedly, the old man hit Zhu Donghun hard on the head again, as he clearly didn't like this question. The main character immediately asked why the old man hit him so hard. To this, the old man responded with displeasure that even when he said something to the guy, he still did not understand the meaning of it because he was untalented. Then the old man said again that his technique allowed him to turn trash into a genius, and accordingly it had no meaning unless this power was used on trash. Simply put, the master's technique was only useful if his target was at the level of food waste. Zhu Donghun was shocked and couldn't believe that this impudent old man had just called him food waste. Meanwhile, the master continued to explain that his technique could not work on people who were not at this level because their bodies had already been influenced by other energies. Compared to them, the main character's body was very pure and weak because the ability to summon the dead could not change this in any way. The old man also said that this was only the second way because in the end the birth of a genius was more impressive than his creation. Hearing all this, Zhu Donghun thought about it and felt that the master's words were harsh but not without meaning. The guy began to assume that perhaps it wasn't just the skeletons that were the issue because he himself could probably become stronger. It was like killing two birds with one stone. After that, the elderly man with a sly smile on his face looked at the guy and already warming up his hands asked if he was ready yet. Zhu Donghun, full of determination, confidently confirmed this, because he had not even guessed what he was about to experience ahead. After just a few minutes, the loud screams of the main character, provoked by incredible pain, began to echo throughout the forest. Zhu Donghun begged the old man to stop and give him at least a minute to rest from the pain. The old man who was massaging the boy's back didn't understand why he was screaming, and said that he hadn't even started using his technique yet. The main character, of course, understood that he had to endure all this. The guy encouraged himself by the fact that this was his path which would help him become a ranker. Suddenly he thought about the words of the old man who had just recently said that all this was only the beginning. Just at that moment, the old man increased the pace and force of his massage. Loud sounds of blows echoed throughout the area, while the master praised the protagonist for his perseverance. At this time, Zhu Donghun endured the incredible pain with all his might and thought only that he absolutely had to endure all of this. Suddenly, the guy received a system notification that he had a new skill called Rank C Pain Resistance. Finally, the finishing blow sounded, which turned out to be the strongest of them. Zhu Donghun could no longer stand on his feet, and so he fell to the ground exhausted. He didn't even have the strength to be happy that it was all over. Meanwhile, the elderly man happily reported that given the seriousness of this technique, the guy did an excellent job, and despite the fact that he was trash, he was able to endure a lot. The master continued to say that the main character had a strong desire to become stronger as well as willpower and perseverance to withstand all the obstacles on the way. That is why the older man believed that not all was lost, which meant that he had not wasted his time on the guy. Zhu Donghun didn't react to this praise in any way and only hoped that their training today was already finished. Suddenly, the old man stated that of course this was not so because they still had 30 minutes at their disposal before the effect of the new high-ranking skill would cease. Without wasting any time, the master asked his student to get up and hoped that he did not think that today he would only enjoy the massage. After this, the old man pointed his finger at the group of already summoned skeletons and stated that they were already waiting for him. Zhu Donghun was shocked when he realized that he had to continue training with the skeletons, but he couldn't object to it. Still having shed a stingy tear, the guy came to terms with his situation but did not stop thinking that he wanted to die right now. The elderly man began to explain that the basis of all professions was physical strength, after which he suggested that the summoned skeletons could build it up even without muscles. The old man suggested starting the training with correct posture. He demonstrated a riding position that he had often used throughout his life. Human muscles were concentrated in the lower body, so good posture was key to developing strength and stability. Skeletons followed all movements without question. The tired Zhu Donghun was also training, but he was unhappy that the old man had just beaten the crap out of him and was now forcing him to stand in this pose. Suddenly, the master decided to remind his student that he had no talent at all. These words could not help but hurt the guy. However, the elderly man admitted that the main character had enough persistence, which was very good. He wanted to teach Zhu Donghun because he believed that the master should not be weaker than the creatures he summoned. The guy himself understood this, so he tried his best. However, it was very hard for the main character because his muscles were already torn and could not recover. That was why Zhu Donghun did not understand the meaning of these trainings and thought that it was more like torture. Some time passed. The main character lay on the ground, completely exhausted, glad that everything was over. The elderly man looked at the sun and finally declared that the training was over for today. He then advised the boy to do this training every morning. Otherwise, he shouldn't even call him again. Zhu Donghun reluctantly agreed. After this, the main character received a system notification that the effect of the skill learning all techniques had ended, and therefore the master began to dissolve into thin air. Thus, the master of all techniques was recalled, and the skill could only be used again after 24 hours. Zhu Donghun needed some time to recover. The main character's subordinates looked at him attentively, as if they were waiting for some kind of order from the guy. Surprisingly, he actually turned to one of his subordinates while breathing heavily. The skeleton immediately responded to this, letting the guy know that he was ready to listen to his request. The main character himself felt uncomfortable, but he asked his subordinate to carry him in his arms since he couldn't even walk on his own. This was the impressive result of the first day of training with the master of all techniques. After some time had passed, Zhu Donghun grabbed the door handle that was familiar to him and opened the door. As soon as the guy entered the room, a familiar voice immediately addressed him. This surprised the main character. Zhu Donghun's boss was very happy that the guy was finally here and asked him to come to him quickly. Then he drew the guy's attention to the men who were also in this room and said that this was the team of survivors in the last dungeon. The main character remembered these people well, but was very surprised to see them here. The man was also recognized as a guy, but they assumed that he had changed a little. He seemed more muscular and even looked much better. Zhu Donghun was a little embarrassed when he heard these compliments, but he himself did not notice any changes in his appearance. Still, the guy noticed that he had actually gained some muscle mass. The shoulders of the main hero area also became wider, as if the very structure of his skeleton had changed. Soon Zhu Donghun assumed that all this was the result of that same 30-minute torturous massage. Still, the guy decided not to think about it for now, because now he was worried about why these hunters suddenly came here for him. The main character didn't waste time and asked what brought the men here. One of the hunters apologized for not introducing himself earlier. The man extended his hand to the boy and said that his name was Kong Jae-ho. He was a crank hunter. The protagonist's actions and behavior made a great impression on him. The man continued to say that since they managed to get out of the dungeon alive, he would like to work with Zhu Donghun. The necromancer was a little surprised by this, but shook his new acquaintance's hand. Then the main character also gave his name and said that he was just a mercenary rank necromancer. Kong Jae-ho decided not to waste time and suggested that the guy get straight to the point, since he had information about another dungeon which could not help but surprise Zhu Donghun. The man continued to say that this was a famous type of crank dungeon and he wanted to hire a necromancer for the job. Unexpectedly, Kong Jae-ho said that he heard that the guy was experiencing financial difficulties, and so he was willing to take any job. Zhu Donghun was shocked to hear this. The main character immediately looked at his boss with displeasure, because it was probably he who told such information to strangers. The boy assumed that the man had deceived Kong Jae-ho by selling him to him in order to get his job back. Nevertheless, the necromancer came to terms with this and confirmed that he really needed the money. Kong Jae-ho was glad to hear this, but warned that this was a crank dungeon and was not at all easy even for its high level. Nevertheless, the man thought that they should try to pass it, because if they were lucky they would all receive a good reward. Then he remembered that recently someone received a potion of strength there. Zhu Donghun was shocked when he heard this and couldn't contain his emotions, because the strength potion was a very unusual item. It was a fairly rare reward in dungeons of any rank. This potion was also able to cure any curses or diseases. Kong Jae-ho thought that this was a good opportunity to earn some extra money, after which he added that this time the main character would not be a porter but a full-fledged member of the team. Without thinking twice, Zhu Donghun asked the man about the payment for this dangerous work. The man calmly replied that since the boy was not a porter, he did not have a fixed payment, but he could count on a fair share of the total profit. Zhu Donghun couldn't believe it when he heard this because it was a very good working condition. Then the guy began to think that if the strength potion were sold, its average price would be about 50 million won. If this amount were divided among 6 hunters, each of them would receive approximately 8.33 million won. The main character, having realized this amount, was delighted and considered that this was not a bad prospect at all. After this, Kang Jae-ho turned to the guy again and asked if he would join their team. The final word was left to Zhu Donghun. After thinking about the curses for a little while, the necromancer agreed to take on this job because he was already tired of being a simple thief. Besides, the main character was very curious to see the power of his evolved skeletons in action, and this job was just a good chance for that. Kang Jae-ho was glad that the guy agreed, after which he added that he just had to come to the appointed place next Monday. Zhu Donghun was already looking forward to this day. After some time, the main character was already at his training ground and was telling everything to the master of all techniques. The boy also told the old man that for some reason the hunters in this world became stronger by exploring dungeons. The old man thought it was funny that a newbie who hadn't even mastered the basics was trying to run without being able to walk. Zhu Donghun asked the old man to help him so that he could earn a living. Still, the master said that he preferred practical experience, and therefore in any case exploring the dungeons was not such a bad idea. Hearing this, Zhu Donghun was very happy because he thought that his teacher had allowed him to take on this work. This was indeed the case, but the older man showed with his menacing appearance that he would not allow the guy to miss training even because of work. Further, the old man, based on the student's reaction, assumed that he wanted to shirk training, but he knew well that the necromancer could summon him even in the dungeon. However, Zhu Donghun resigned himself to it. Suddenly, the older man suggested that the guy not waste time and begin the massage. The main character, hearing this, began to get very nervous because he did not expect that this moment would come so soon. The next moment, a loud scream from a guy who couldn't withstand this incredible pain echoed throughout the forest. Some time passed. The painful massage finally ended, and now the main character could at least come to his senses. The older man praised the boy for his good work and said that their training was over for today. Zhu Donghun couldn't even show joy, and all he could think about was that he almost died again. Thanks to the new skill that the guy received during the massage, he could at least somehow cope with this pain. The main character also saw potential for development in him. The old man continued to praise his student and say that he had behaved well. Out of politeness, the main character replied that all this was only thanks to his teacher. Suddenly, the master of all techniques announced that, in his opinion, starting tomorrow, they would be able to slightly increase the intensity of their training. Zhu Donghun heard this and was very scared, but he tried not to show it. Instead, the guy asked if he had really heard everything correctly. The old man did not respond to this, but only turned to the skeletons and suggested that they begin their training. The master loudly ordered everyone to gather. The summoned creatures immediately obeyed the old man. The skeletons began to approach the elderly man, loudly knocking their bones as they went. Then the old man pointed to the right place and ordered his disciples to come here and squat down as last time. After this, the elderly man declared that from now on, while they were training their physiques, he would teach each skeleton one technique every day. Zhu Donghun was very surprised by this, and in the meantime, the old man was already warming up his hands. Suddenly, he turned to the skeleton swordsman and said that he would be the first. The skeleton turned hesitantly to his master to find out his opinion on this matter. Zhu Donghun nodded his head approvingly, although he himself did not yet fully understand everything. Then the guy told the old man that it was a skeleton swordsman who had no skills at all, and all he could do was swing a sword. The master of all techniques considered that this was not a problem since they would be able to develop skills as they went along. After this, the old man suddenly ordered the skeleton to start swinging his sword. The summoned creature seemed to start to worry because it did not fully understand what the old man wanted to achieve. Zhu Donghun noticed this and decided to calm his subordinate down by saying that the master of all techniques would make him the greatest swordsman. However, the main character, looking at him with a crazy look, warned the skeleton that he would have to train until his bones broke. These words did not inspire the swordsman at all and seemed to make him even more nervous. Nevertheless, the skeleton obeyed the elderly man's order and set to work. The summoned creature made sweeping movements with its heavy sword, demonstrating all its opinions. At that moment, the master of all techniques turned to the main character and asked if his name was Zhu Donghun, since they had not had the opportunity to get to know each other properly before that. The guy confirmed this and began to listen carefully to what the elderly man would tell him. Suddenly the old man asked the main character what he thought fencing was. The necromancer replied that since it was called fencing it meant it was a technique in which a sword was used. The teacher hearing this said that the boy had a simple way of thinking as he expected. It was not the first time for Zhu Donghun to hear such criticism. Nevertheless, the old man continued to say that the guy was right and that there really was no need to think too much about this issue. Clutching a stick in his hands, the elderly man explained that fencing skill was simply the ability to handle a sword. Nothing more, nothing less. Suddenly he threw a stick to the main character and asked him to take it in his hands. Zhu Donghun looked at the training equipment and seemed to understand what the master of all techniques wanted to do. The guy picking up a stick from the ground assumed that the old man now wanted not only for the skeletons to inherit all of his techniques. It seemed to the main character that the master also wanted him to inherit them. As soon as the stick was in Zhu Donghun's hands, the old man quickly ordered him to use it. The protagonist took hold of the stick and hesitantly asked how the teacher wanted him to use it. The older man replied that the boy shouldn't have thought about it, but instead should have kept his imaginary dreams as he felt more comfortable. Zhu Donghun followed the old man's order without asking any questions and moved on to the next stage of training. After this, the teacher ordered his student to swing the stick as hard as possible. The necromancer immediately tried to do this. The master of all techniques, seeing the guy's efforts, praised him for his work. Zhu Donghun was surprised by this because he still did not fully understand what was happening. He couldn't believe that the old man was seriously praising him for such inept movements and began to doubt that he really was a top-class master. Suddenly, the old man drew the boy's attention to the grip of his right hand. The protagonist held his thumb firmly up and the other 4 fingers held it in place. The old man also said that his student swung once from the 10 o'clock position to the 4 o'clock position, and then again from the 2 o'clock position to the 8 o'clock position. Then the teacher said that he hadn't taught the boy anything yet, but he was already swinging in a way that he considered more convenient for cutting. The old man continued to say that the perception of this cut was based on everything that the main character had experienced throughout his life. Could be said that Zhu Donghun simply put his life into this swing, which couldn't help but surprise the guy. The main character thought about the words of his teacher and at least stopped being surprised by the conclusions made. After this, the old man asked if the cut that the boy had just made would be more powerful if he added strength and speed to it. Zhu Donghun didn't know what to answer to this. The master of all techniques didn't like the fact that the guy was making such a stupid face again. Still, he himself answered that any cut became more powerful if you add strength and speed to it. This was a very simple fact that would never change even if the end of the world came. Zhu Donghun looked at his improvised weapon and began to ponder over his teacher's words. It seemed that the main character finally understood what the master of all techniques wanted from him. The necromancer suggested that he should have created his own cut and then added strength and speed to it. Suddenly the old man turned around and headed somewhere. I assume that the guy began to understand his words. Zhu Donghun confirmed this. The older man then asked his student if he knew what would happen if he repeated the cut millions of times and reached its peak. In order to clearly demonstrate this, the master of all techniques took a sword in his hand. He asked the main character to watch carefully because this is exactly the fencing that he and his skeleton will learn. Zhu Donghun looked at the old man with bated breath because this was almost the first time that the great master demonstrated his skills to him. The next moment, the old man swung his heavy sword with all his might to make a sharp swing. He added strength and speed to his cut so that the swing quickly pierced the air without encountering any resistance along the way. It was easy to see how waves of energy spread out in all directions from the blade of the sword and gusts of wind arose. Zhu Donghun looked at all this without looking away, even though this swing only took a few seconds. At the same time, the old man said that there was no theory here. The older man then asked his impressed student to simply make his cut stronger. Also, the master of all techniques said that if the main character does this, then everyone will end up using his cut as a base. After seeing this, Zhu Donghun realized that there was nothing wrong with his awkward posture. The guy also believed that no one should care that he swung his sword differently because it was only his weapon and therefore he used it as he liked. The next moment, the protagonist made a sharp swing of his sword and immediately received a system notification that he had received a new skill crank slash. A high-ranking hunter sat in his office carefully filling out important documents. This hunter was the head of the Parang Guild. Suddenly his younger sister approached him and distracted him from his work. Guildmaster Parang was ranked 58th in the world. His name was Jipperang. He was also known as a fine bowman. The guy was very surprised when he saw Ji Soyul in front of him. It seemed that the girl was unhappy about something. Jipperang immediately asked what was the matter since this was his younger sister's first time coming to him here. The Dark Empress, sitting on a comfortable sofa, honestly admitted that something had been bothering her lately. This surprised the guy even more. The unexpected girl directly asked if a drank hunter could suddenly display strength that surpassed that of a ranker. Jipperang thought that this was a rather strange question and waited for an explanation, but Ji Soyul simply asked him to answer her question. Still, the guy started saying that usually even if a lucky chance came along or a skill was acquired, it took time to make it your own, so one could say that this was very unlikely. The guild leader continued to say that if such a case really was, the only explanation for it would be that the person was hiding his true abilities. Ji Soyul was very doubtful that the hunter she asked about could be hiding something. Jipperang believed his younger sister's words because he knew well that even rankers could not hide their abilities from her eyes. All this was due to the fact that the girl had a high-ranking search skill which allowed her to see what others did not see. Then the guy thought that his assumption didn't make sense, so he directly asked the girl if something had really happened. It seemed like it was very hard for Ji Soyul to talk about this, so she didn't want to answer this question at all. The thing was that she had not yet reported to her brother what had happened. There was a dungeon. The girl simply could not tell the head of the guild that she had been defeated more than once. The Dark Empress recalled with displeasure that old man who was hiding behind the ill-fated old door in the depths of the dungeon. Ji Soyul had never felt so helpless as she did at that moment. However, despite all this, the drank hunter was somehow able to do what she could not. The girl admitted that, of course, her first impression of him was unusual. Already in the cave and facing difficulties, the Dark Empress was simply curious to look at the inconspicuous porter, so she gave him a chance to prove himself. Surprisingly, the main character made full use of this chance, which is why Ji Soyul was now very puzzled. The girl remembered that Zhu Donghun had promised to tell her about everything as soon as he settled everything, so for now she was going to patiently wait for that moment. Jipperang interrupted the girl's thoughts by saying that she was somehow suspicious. He noticed that before she had a serious face, now she was smiling. This made the boy curious because before his sister hadn't cared about anything except owning a dagger. Suddenly Ji Soyul suddenly stood up from her seat and began to deny the guild leader's words. After that she wanted to leave. Finally Jipperang asked his sister not to be shy and to talk to him honestly, but the girl did not want to discuss anything anymore. At this time the members of the hunting team that hired the main character were already standing near the magic portal and preparing to set off on an adventure. Suddenly they heard rustling sounds behind them which someone was making casually. Kong Jae-ho and his comrades were already beginning to worry that someone would disturb them. It turned out that it was Zhu Donghun who had already come here to go to the dungeon with the hunters. Everyone was happy to see him. Kong Jae-ho said that he sent the guy all the details about the dungeon via SMS and hoped that the main character had already studied everything along the way. The necromancer confirmed this. This dungeon was a C-rank desert-type dungeon. The main mission of this dungeon was to destroy monsters and defeat the boss, which was typical for such dungeons. Zhu Donghun informed the group's leader that he had already put on sunscreen and stocked up on ice water so as not to languish in the heat. Kong Jae-ho praised the guy for his serious preparation. Suddenly something to the side caught the attention of the main character. Zhu Donghun looked at the other participants of this expedition and realized that there were many more people here than the group leader had mentioned. There were two girls here who were unfamiliar to the main character. One of them was telling her friend that these were the gates to the dungeon, and when they passed through them they would see a desert. Kong Jae-ho noticed Zhu Donghun's puzzled look and immediately said that this time they invited 2 franc porters who of course had already been paid, so there was no need to worry. This explanation calmed the main character because now he understood everything. The thing was that in order to pick up the ore and items that fell in the dungeon, the group of researchers had to have porters. After that, Zhu Donghun thought that even though this dungeon was C rank, in his opinion everything should have gone well. Any anxiety the guy had was calmed by the fact that in the end his skeletons could defeat the orc who was a drank superior being in the blink of an eye. Still, the main character entered the glowing magical portal. From that moment one could consider that his adventures had begun. A moment later Zhu Donghun found himself in a very unfriendly place. He was greeted by a lifeless, monotonous landscape and a calm sky. The protagonist took the first step and immediately received a system notification that he had entered the dungeon. Immediately after this, the system notified the guy that he had been exposed to a harsh environment. Of course, this was talking about the bright sun, which in addition to light gave off a lot of heat. Because of this impact, all of Zhu Donghuan's indicators were reduced by 10%, which was certainly not very good. Other hunters were also surprised that it was so hot here but suggested thinking of it all as a sauna. Zhu Donghuan looked at the people around him and how they were running away from the heat and did not understand whether it was really so difficult for them. To the surprise of the main character himself, such conditions were quite bearable. If you compare all this with the hellish massage that the guy received from the old man, then it was just child's play. Unexpectedly, the main character used his skill to summon awakened skeletons. It was still unclear why he did this. At that very moment, 5 subordinates appeared next to him, ready to carry out any of his orders. The skeleton that wielded the shield slammed it loudly into the sand, showing his readiness for any eventuality. This could not fail to attract the attention of all those present, many of whom were seeing something like this for the first time. One of the guys looked closely at the summoned creatures and said that they had become stronger since the last time he saw them. Zhu Donghuan did not deny this. Suddenly Kang Jae-ho turned to all his comrades and asked them to concentrate because there were many scorpions and snakes here. Some of the hunters were not at all enthusiastic about this information, but the group leader reassured them by saying that these were only crank monsters. After this, Kang Jae-ho turned to the porters and said that they just needed to watch everything carefully and pick up what they were told. Soon the hunters set off on their journey. The skeletons of the main character also followed them. Not much time had passed, but some hunters could no longer stand the heat and asked how much longer they had to go. Suddenly Kang Jae-ho ordered all his comrades to stop as if he saw some danger ahead. At first glance, everything seemed absolutely calm. Only a slight wind was rolling small grains of sand from place to place. That is why the hunters did not understand what was going on and why their leader ordered them to stop so suddenly. The next moment there was a loud noise, after which no one doubted that stopping was the right decision. From under the hot sand, a sharp scorpion sting suddenly emerged, intending to injure people. A few seconds later, several huge sand scorpions were thrown at the hunters, taking them by surprise. Despite all this suddenness, one of the hunters did not lose his vigilance and quickly grabbed his dagger, intending to fight back the enemy. Kang Jae-ho began to swing his weapon deftly, causing serious injuries to the scorpions. At the same time, the man ordered his comrades to gather and stand in battle formation in order to repel the attack of the scorpions. The hunters immediately obeyed the order despite their excitement and took up fighting stances. Meanwhile, Zhu Donghuan calmly watched this battle from the side and thought that the desert scorpions were probably as strong as the orc he had once encountered. After this, the main character turned to the skeleton magician to give him his order. The summoned creature began to listen attentively to its master. The necromancer asked the skeleton to use his air shield skill on him. A moment later, this order was carried out. Zhu Donghuan was now safe because he was surrounded by reliable protection on all sides. After this, the main character turned to all his subordinates and decided that they should not simply stand aside. The next moment, the damned necromancer with great joy ordered his subordinates to destroy all opponents. Zhu Donghuan watched what was happening with great pleasure and was not worried at all since he had already ensured his safety. At this time, his skeleton fearlessly walked forward, intending to attract the attention of the enemy. Along the way, he used his low-level aggro skill to make the desert scorpions attack him. Zhu Donghuan ordered his subordinates to advance forward and destroy all the dangerous monsters. Along with this, the main character received a system notification that several scorpions had already paid attention to the skeleton with the shield. It was a great moment for the skeleton swordsman to attack the scorpions using the skills he had acquired during his training. However, despite the strong blows, the skeleton's iron sword could not pierce the scorpion's strong shell. The summoned creature dealt one blow after another, but the monster remained unharmed. However, it was clear that the scorpions did not like such attacks at all, so they tried to retreat. The main character noticed this and was very surprised because although his subordinates could not break through the monster's defense, their attacks, that was why Zhu Donghuan loudly ordered his skeleton to continue attacking, hoping that the scorpion's shell would soon be destroyed. The guy's guess turned out to be correct. The skeleton spearman was able to plunge his weapon deep into the monster, causing green blood to spray out around him at the same moment. The other skeletons did the same, so it was safe to say that one of the opponents had already been defeated. Zhu Donghun continued to watch the battle and was pleased with his subordinates and thought that everything was going quite well. Kang Jae-ho also grabbed the necromancer and his skeletons, thinking that he was very lucky to have accidentally met him in the dungeon. The main character began to assure that all this was nonsense and he was able to do this only because the leader of the group dealt with the largest crowd of scorpions. The man asked the boy not to be shy and added that random meetings improved Zhu Donghun's personality. He thanked him for treating him favorably. Despite the very pleasant atmosphere of the main character, it was still alarming how often Kang Jae-ho talked about a chance meeting. In addition, there was another thing that was very confusing to Zhu Donghun and caused unpleasant suspicions. The guy clearly saw that all the hunters surrounding him now were very strong, so they probably didn't need to take in a rank mercenary with them. At the same time, they all knew very well that it was Zhu Donghun who received the reward from the high-difficulty dungeon. However, due to the non-disclosure contract with the Parang Guild, none of these hunters could openly talk or ask the protagonist about this. Zhu Donghun believed that these people had only one way to answer their questions, and that was to explore the dungeon. There were no CCTV cameras here and no traces were left behind. The guy knew well that accidents often happened in the dungeons. The hunter's suspicious glances only worsened the surrounding atmosphere and gave Zhu Donghun bad thoughts. That's why the guy thought he had to be careful and continue to watch these people. The damned necromancer did not show that he suspected the people around him and continued to humbly follow them. He didn't notice how pleased Kang Jae-ho was, as if everything was going according to his plan. After some time, the hunters arrived at the lonely ruins of an ancient temple. The system immediately notified the main character that this was a stage called the Ancient King of Scorpions in the desert. In order to remove the seal and move on, it was necessary to make a sacrifice. The condition of this stage was that people now had to place 2 offerings on the altar. These victims were supposed to be living Frank hunters or higher. This message made the girls very tense. Zhu Donghun was also not happy because Kang Jae-ho and his comrades did not say at all that any sacrifices were necessary here. Suddenly someone behind started laughing and said that it was a very strange condition. This laughter did not calm one of the girls down at all. The men seemed to sincerely not understand how such a condition could have arisen here and did not know where they could find an offering in the desert. Looking back, the girl saw sly smiles on the hunters' faces which spoke for themselves. Hoping to get a clear answer, she immediately turned to the leader of the group and asked what all this meant. Kang Jae-ho calmly explained that they had to bring 2 living hunters as an offering. Everything was crystal clear here. After this, he rudely ordered the girls not to stand still but to go up to the altar. Because of this, they were very scared. One of the girls did not fully believe what was happening and asked if their employers had gone crazy. Kang Jae-ho replied that the girl could think so if it made her feel calmer. The second girl, not holding back her emotions, began to ask why the hunters were doing this to them. She then asked if the group leader had really intended to do this to them from the very beginning. The man's sly smile did not hide this at all. Suddenly he asked if the girls didn't find it strange that the payment for their useless work was higher than usual. Get out your dagger, the man continued, saying that if the girls wanted to get a high payment, then they had to pay a high price in return. Zhu Donghun calmly watched this situation from the side while being surprised that the group leader was behaving like this in front of him. This probably meant that Kang Jae-ho was completely confident that he could defeat the protagonist if he objected. Because of this, the necromancer was completely dissatisfied with what was happening, but he still did not understand what he should do. Meanwhile, Kang Jae-ho threatened with his dagger and asked the girls to stop resisting and obediently walk to the altar. At that moment, someone suddenly stood between the head of the group and the defenseless girls, preventing the villain from carrying out his plan. Kang Jae-ho was very surprised by what was happening because he did not expect that this particular person would go against him. The man turned to the main character and said that he should not have interfered in this, otherwise it would mean that he went against them. I didn't get any answer. Kang Jae-ho assumed that the guy was more naive than he thought or was just playing the hero. Zhu Donghun didn't waste any time and asked the man to shut up and what his goal was. The leader of the group didn't understand what the guy was talking about. Then the main character directly asked why the scoundrel came to the mercenary guild and brought him to this dungeon. The man was surprised that the necromancer was not so stupid. Zhu Donghun didn't intend to speak for long. so he loudly demanded that the man quickly tell him everything. Kang Jae-ho began to say that the protagonist had passed that dungeon not only by luck, and so now he was interested in learning about the chance meeting. The man didn't know how the main character prepared and defeated that ranker, but that's why they went so far to bring him to this dungeon, and that's what it all means. Suddenly, the leader of the group stated that despite their interest, they were not going to fight with the guy. This could not help but surprise him. In order to understand what all this meant, Zhu Donghun directly asked why he was brought here. Kang Jae-ho honestly answered that they did it in order to show what kind of people they were. They also wanted to invite the main character to join their group and work together. The man continued to say that if the main character decided to join them, then of course he would have to give them part of what he received from his successful meeting because it was fair. Zhu Donghun was amazed by the impudence of these hunters, so he called them crazy scoundrels without any qualms of conscience. After that, he thought about how these people directly called themselves villains and invited him to join them. If the main character accepts this offer, he will have to give part of his reward to them. This was their plan. Zhu Donghun had no intention of living up to the scoundrels' expectations and playing by their rules, so he was already thinking about how to teach them a lesson. Kang Jae-ho had already prepared his sharp dagger and waited for the protagonist's final answer with a sly smile on his face. The mysterious man, whose face was hidden by a mask, also took out his weapon, demonstrating that Zhu Donghun had to make the right choice. At this time, the old man said with displeasure that he knew that something like this would happen when his student told him that he would go to the dungeon. The worried protagonist asked the elder to give him some advice because this situation could not be delayed. That is why he called him. The elderly man calmly advised the boy to come to terms with his participation, since he was uneven with all these hunters. The master of all techniques felt very sorry that the guy who claimed to be his student could not cope even with such weaklings. Zhu Donghun became very nervous and asked the old man to stop complaining because if he died, the teacher would not be able to achieve his goal. Suddenly, the dissatisfied elderly man began to say that he did not ask the guy to get involved in this matter, and even if he had mastered all the techniques, he could not do the impossible. After that, the same mysterious man in the mask turned to the guy and asked what he got from this opportunity. This question gave the protagonist some ideas, so he was in no hurry to become disillusioned with his situation. The guy thought that this scoundrel needed the opportunity, that is the reward that he received for completing that very dungeon. As soon as Zhu Donghun realized this, it was as if lightning had struck him because this was the solution to his situation. The guy realized that the villains were trying to intimidate him and pretend that they were in control of the situation, but they would have problems if he did not cooperate and share his secrets. It seemed that the elderly man understood what his student had just been thinking and therefore decided to silently watch how he would get out of this situation. Zhu Donghun turned to the hunters and asked if they really wanted to know about his ability. The masked man confirmed this and added that it was a reward for completing a dungeon that even Ji Soyul couldn't complete, so they were very interested in it. After that, the main character said that in that case he would tell everything because hiding something from an rank hunter was useless. Hearing this, the man immediately hid his weapon and said that the guy made a wise choice and was smarter than he initially thought. However, everything was not so simple. To begin with, Zhu Donghun decided to set his own conditions to the scoundrels. The guy started saying that he wouldn't tell anything until he was allowed to fight the traitor who lured him into this trap. Zhu Donghun insisted that until that happened, the disappointment and resentment in his heart would not allow him to say anything. After that, the main character began to smile and ask if such a deal was suitable for the villains. At this time, the necromancer's subordinates were already ready. The man in the mask was clearly unhappy that the guy was setting his own conditions, but he was in no hurry to refuse him. The girls, who by an unfortunate coincidence found themselves in this situation, stood silently to the side and tried not to attract attention to themselves. Zhu Donghun continued to insist that he had some sort of mental disorder due to which he couldn't just tolerate when his pride was occupied. The main villain was in no hurry to believe every word of the main character and assumed that he was up to something. The damned necromancer began to assure that the man had no reason to worry because he understood perfectly well that he would not be able to escape from him. Zhu Donghun continued to say that even if he was planning something, he would never be able to deceive the eyes of an rank hunter. The masked man agreed with this, but Kang Jae-ho insisted that his brother not hesitate and listen to all this nonsense. The main character already knew that he would soon die because right now a killer from the hidden shadows stood in front of him. However, even in this case, the guy could not allow the traitors to leave unharmed, so he asked the masked man to let him do it or just kill him right now. Unexpectedly, Zhu Donghun pointed his subordinate's sword at himself, and loudly threatened to commit suicide if his demand was not met. The masked man, after listening to all this, asked the main character not to rush into this. Kang Jae-ho was already starting to get very nervous because he thought that his brother was ready to satisfy the guy's demand. Still, the killer decided to give Zhu Donghan 30 minutes to resolve all his affairs, but he shouldn't do anything stupid in the process. Otherwise, the man threatened to make sure that the main character would live forever in torment, unable to die. He then looked sternly at Zhu Donghan and asked if he understood him well, making it clear that this was not a joke. The man in the mask threatened that he would make sure that the main character lived in pain forever, unable to die. He then looked sternly at Zhu Donghan and asked if he understood him well, making it clear that this was not a joke. Zhu Donghan, without taking his skeleton sword away from his throat, briefly confirmed this so as not to provoke the killer. At the same time, Kang Jae-ho was very nervous and angry, looking at the main character because he didn't want to fight with him at all. Because of this, the hand that held the dagger was shaking violently, but despite this, the man insisted that Zhu Donghan would not be able to defeat him. The guy didn't argue with this, but instead calmly said that they would only find out about everything when they tried to fight each other. Suddenly, an old man approached the boy and wanted to help his student. He suggested replacing the training this time with practical guidance in real time. After this, the teacher asked the main character what, in his opinion, he should have done to resist the killer. The guy answered that he needed to preserve his strength as much as possible. The master confirmed this by saying that he should have applied a minimum of force for maximum effect. Then the old man decided to teach the student a strategy for using the enemy's strength against him. Zhu Donghan thanked the old man for his help and then concentrated on starting the battle. The next moment, the protagonist used all his skills and commanded the summoned skeletons to attack his opponents. The otherworldly creatures immediately rushed into battle, not intending to spare anyone. Despite the fact that it was only D rank, the men did not find this battle easy. However, Kang Jae-ho was absolutely confident in his strength, and with only daggers in his hands, he rushed at the skeleton with a shield. At that moment, several sharp arrows appeared in the sky, flying at great speed straight towards the villains. The man had to quickly retreat back so that this fight would not end for him prematurely due to the skeleton archer's insidious attack. Kang Jae-ho was very unhappy and very angry because the main character had his own methods of fighting which the man did not like at all. At the same time, the skeleton mage used his fireball skill, causing a bright flame to appear in the sky above his head. Without wasting any time, the protagonist's subordinate mercilessly directed this attack at his opponents. People had no choice but to seek shelter in order to save themselves, while being surprised that the skeleton was somehow throwing fireballs. Meanwhile, the skeleton swordsman was also meekly following Zhu Donghuan's orders and was fearlessly rushing to attack right now. Kang Jae-ho was able to stop his opponent's strike, but it took a lot of effort on the man's part to hold it back. Suddenly, one of the villain's daggers could not withstand the onslaught of the sharp sword and broke. Kang Jae-ho, seeing this, realized that he was now in a losing position, which is why he began to get very nervous and was distracted from the fight. The skeleton took advantage of this moment and kicked his opponent, sending him flying backwards. A man in a mask calmly watched all this from the side and thought that the movements of all these skeletons were impeccable and pure. He even began to worry that at this rate Zhu Donghan could actually win this battle. Suddenly, the man felt a strange sensation that instantly made him tense up and concentrate in order to understand what had happened. The killer began to look around nervously, trying to understand why he felt the presence of the main character near the entrance to the dungeon, because at this time he should have been outside. At this time, Kang Jae-ho was already completely exhausted and could barely get to his feet. Suddenly, someone's shadow approached him, causing the man to freeze on the spot, anticipating the worst outcome for himself. He looked up and saw a disgruntled Zhu Donghan in front of him, staring at him as if he was about to scold him for a serious offense. Kang Jae-ho was very scared and, trying to crawl away, loudly asked the main character not to come near him and leave him alone. The old man, watching what was happening, began to say that all these hunters were too weak to call this a real combat experience, but it was a good start for his student. Zhu Donghan thought that he would only gain real combat experience if he killed the villain. At this time, the masked man did not follow the fight at all, as he was busy with something else. Despite the old man's objection, Zhu Donghan was determined to kill his opponent since he had put his life on the line from the very beginning. For this guy, he turned to the skeleton swordsman. Suddenly, the main character was struck by lightning from surprise when he saw what was happening ahead. The guy saw in the distance some man in black clothes who was quickly approaching them. He didn't even guess who it could be. Unexpectedly, the old man called his disciple a fool because another deadly assassin had just entered the battlefield. Zhu Donghun was very surprised to hear this. The master of all techniques said with great regret that the main character was good in everything else but never thought ahead. The guy didn't respond to this because he still didn't fully understand everything and couldn't believe that his plans had collapsed with the appearance of this killer. Still, Zhu Donghun regretfully admitted to himself that his teacher was right because he no longer had a trick up his sleeve and he was still a weakling in the world of hunters. Now the guy didn't even understand why not long ago he had been so confident in himself. He admitted that he took a big risk and in the end it turned against him. Now the main character has no choice but to regret it. Meanwhile, Kang Jae-ho laughed loudly at the necromancer's failure and sarcastically asked if he really thought that they would come here with only one elder from the hidden shadows. At this moment, the very second killer whose appearance had so alarmed the main character had already arrived at the scene. Zhu Donghun was very nervous and didn't know what to do. The guy even began to assume that he should just run away from here. Suddenly the killer turned to his colleague and said that they should leave here quickly since Ji Soyul was somewhere nearby. The main character was very surprised to hear this because he did not understand at all what the Dark Empress had to do with it and why she was here. Just at that moment the girl was already standing near the magical portal that led to this deserted dungeon and seemed to be preparing to enter inside. The mysterious masked man continued to tell his comrade that they needed to act immediately because if they were caught they would definitely be killed. Without wasting any time, both assassins literally disappeared, leaving a shocked Kang Jae-ho all alone. The man started shouting loudly in order to try to stop them because he also did not want to answer for his actions. No one heard these screams because the killers had already disappeared. They literally disappeared. Zhu Donghun was still surprised by what was happening and did not believe that the power of a rancor was so great that it made the villains run away just from his name. Meanwhile, in the cool forest, everything was quiet and calm. Ji Soyul, who stood in front of the magic portal, didn't even know what was happening in the dungeon right now. The girl doubted whether she should have used this portal and believed that she had overreacted. The Dark Empress admitted to herself that she followed the main character as if she were stalking him. The girl was able to track Zhu Donghun's location to this dungeon using the Parang Guild's information. However, Ji Soyul felt that all of this was wrong, so she turned around and started to leave. The girl decided to trust the main character who promised her that he would tell her everything as soon as he sorted out his affairs. Therefore, the Dark Empress began to walk away believing that she needed to give the guy a little more time. Meanwhile, Kang Jae-ho, who could barely stand on his feet, could not come to terms with his losing position. The man saw his comrades being attacked by summoned skeletons, but all he could think about was that he couldn't die here like this. Despite the ruthlessness of the protagonist's subordinates, Kang Jae-ho has already decided that he will definitely live. The man was clearly out of his mind from excitement and therefore, in order to survive, he was ready to do anything. The villain looked at the deceived girls and intended to use everything he had for his own purpose. Near an ancient dilapidated temple in the middle of the desert, a battle continued on which the well-being of Zhu Donghun depended. Kang Jae-ho was very unhappy with his losing position and seemed willing to do anything to win. The protagonist saw right through the man and knew that he could not defeat him by force, so he planned to do something with the girls behind him. At some point, the villain began to quickly run towards the guy intending to carry out his plan. The necromancer immediately realized that his opponent had taken action and therefore ordered his subordinate to stop him. The skeleton swordsman immediately rushed to attack and already swung his sharp sword in order to stop any intentions of Kang Jae-ho. The man did not expect that the summoned creature would appear next to him so quickly, which made him hesitate for a couple of seconds. The next moment, the skeleton swordsman did not attack his opponent and with just one blow mercilessly cut off his left arm. From such a powerful and precise blow, the scoundrel's hand simply flew far to the side. It won't help him anymore. Zhu Donghun felt no pity for the man and only wondered if the scoundrel would have spared him if he had been weaker. Watching closely the suffering of his opponent, the protagonist still believed that Kang Jae-ho would never spare him. The guy thought the same thing about the other hunters, so their fate had already been decided. Meanwhile, the man, probably experiencing pain, swore loudly and threatened that he would not just tolerate all this. Suddenly, the villain quickly jumped to his feet and pushing off the ground with force started running. Kang Jae-ho was heading straight towards the protagonist. It seemed like he wanted to defeat him with his bare hands. However, the guy had nothing to worry about because his skeleton swordsman clearly saw the approaching danger and was already ready to eliminate it using the most radical methods. The next moment, the summoned creature rushed towards its opponent and with one gift lightning fast cut off his right leg. Kang Jae-ho once again experienced incredible pain from which he could not hold back his frantic scream. Zhu Donghun watched his opponent's torment with complete calm, believing that he fully deserved it all. The man continued to swear loudly and blame the main character for all his troubles. The necromancer did not react to this in any way. Kang Jae-ho slammed his fist into the ground in anger and asked why it was Zhu Donghun who had to appear before him. At this moment, the main character began to slowly approach the man and ask what he was talking about. Then he leaned towards his former opponent and with a satisfied expression on his face said that it was he who had stopped in front of him. Kang Jae-ho had already fully admitted his defeat, so he asked the guy not to waste time and to kill him quickly. Zhu Donghun was in no hurry to fulfill the dying man's last wishes, because he had completely different plans. Continuing to smile slyly, the guy asked the man for forgiveness and said that he would not die so easily. Kang Jae-ho was very unhappy to hear this, which made him even more angry. The man began to grab the main character by the clothes and loudly demand that he simply kill him. Suddenly, the skeleton grabbed the villain's hand tightly, so that he would not harm his master. The creature then attempted to pull Kang Jae-ho aside while he loudly asked what the skeleton was going to do. The man demanded that the undead immediately release him, but the main character's subordinates silently dragged their opponent along with them. After this, the scoundrel carelessly threw the skeleton onto the very altar on which the sacrifice was to be placed. Zhu Donghun began to recall that they had to sacrifice 2 living hunters to open the room with the boss of this dungeon. Kang Jae-ho was very unhappy with his situation, but there was nothing he could do. The system notified the protagonist that the sacrifices had been made and the conditions were now being checked. At the same time, Zhu Donghun thought that if all this had not happened, he would have simply left this dungeon without clearing it. However, the guy had no intention of thanking the scoundrels for luring him into this trap. The protagonist calmly watched as the altar began to glow brightly and checked the victims it offered. While this check was going on, Zhu Donghun thought that he always gave back what he received from other people. The main character responded to kindness with kindness, and the girls he saved could confirm this. At the same time, the guy cruelly took revenge on those who offended him. His subordinates' bloody weapons served as an argument in favor of this. If someone tried to take his life, Zhu Donghun was ready to take it from his opponent. The next moment, the system notified the protagonist that all the conditions were met, due to which a bright light swallowed the hunters. The ancient seal was removed and the bodies of the scoundrels sacrificed simply disappeared from the altar, leaving behind only a little ashes. Zhu Donghun mentally said goodbye to his offenders, wishing that they would live well in the next life. Suddenly, the guy remembered something which caused him to become a little distracted. Now he was very interested in why Ji Soyul was not here yet. The shadow ghosts ran away afraid of her appearance, which meant the girl was somewhere nearby and should have already appeared. Zhu Donghun admitted that if it weren't for the Dark Empress, things could have gone completely wrong, and he would have probably had to fight 2 rank hunters at once. In the worst-case scenario, the protagonist could well have ended up on that altar instead of his defeated opponents. The next moment, the huge stone gates of the ancient temple began to slowly open, making a loud grinding noise along the way. Zhu Donghun was stunned for a moment by surprise and fear, because he had no idea what was waiting for him behind these gates. Along the way, the system informed the main character that the ancient king of scorpions had been freed. The fury of this dungeon boss, which had been suppressed for centuries, was now bursting into the sky, and strong gusts of wind almost knocked the guy off his feet. The girls, who had not expected to find themselves in such a situation at all, were now very scared and could only hope for the best. At the same time, Zhu Donghun's subordinates were suppressed by the presence of a strong being, causing all of their stats to be reduced by a whopping 20%. The protagonist was surprised by this and admitted that now this situation really made him nervous. Suddenly, one of the frightened girls turned to the necromancer and asked if everything would be okay with them all. The guy couldn't answer this question exactly, but he thought that all this was still better than fighting with shadow ghosts. The girl confidently agreed with this. These words seemed to encourage her, and now she didn't look so scared. After this, the main character decided to calm down himself, thinking along the way that he simply had to do what he had trained so hard for. Suddenly, his teacher turned to the boy and asked if he was sure that he could cope with such an insignificant creature without his help. The old man continued to say that if Zhu Donghun couldn't handle this opponent, it would be better for him to just die. The necromancer asked his teacher not to joke with such a serious face. To this, the master of all techniques calmly replied that he was not joking at all, after which he said that he was already leaving. Finally, the old man asked the guy not to forget to call him tomorrow. The next moment, the old man disappeared as the duration of the skill learning all techniques ended. Zhu Donghun completely forgot about this time. The main character did not expect this at all, and therefore for some time could not believe that time had really already run out and he was left alone. Just at that moment, a loud ominous sound was heard from the depths of the dark corridor, which frightened not only the guy but also his skeletons. Immediately after this, a huge scorpion, which was the boss of this dungeon, approached the exit of the ancient temple. The monster looked at the main character with displeasure, his red eyes literally burning with rage. Despite this, Zhu Donghun quickly came to terms with the fact that he would eventually have to confront this creature alone, and so he was already prepared for battle. Zhu Donghun quickly came to terms with the fact that he would eventually have to confront this creature alone, and so he was already prepared for battle. All of the main character's subordinates were also already prepared despite the fear that was inherent even to skeletons. However, despite the general readiness of the enemy, the one the necromancer and his subordinates were waiting for was still not there. Zhu Donghun was surprised by this, but he was able to immediately guess that the boss of this dungeon would attack him from underground. Without wasting time, the guy turned to the skeleton mage, making it clear that he should quickly use the air shield skill and protect him. After this, the protagonist ordered the rest of the skeletons to disperse and form a line in order to fully prepare to meet their enemy. The guy himself stood behind the skeleton, who wielded a shield in order to best protect himself. At this point, all preparations were completed and all that was left was to wait. The skeleton archer, who was already looking for his target in the dark corridors of the temple, suddenly felt something. For now, he did not understand what it was. The next moment, the ground under the feet of the summoned creature began to crack as if something was trying to break out of it. As it turned out, it was the Scorpion King who, in the first seconds of his appearance, was able to defeat one of his opponents. Zhu Donghun was shocked that the scorpion ignored him and attacked the skeleton standing behind him. Because of this, he assumed that this boss had intelligence. After this, the huge scorpion began to look around, choosing the next target for its attack. One of the skeletons tried to retreat back because he felt that the monster would now want to attack him. As it turned out, he was right. Scorpio, with eyes red with rage, growled loudly and was already aiming to hit the skeleton with his tail. The protagonist immediately noticed this, and in order to protect his subordinate, he ordered the skeleton with a shield to stop their enemy. The skeleton immediately slammed its shield onto the ground, thus using its low-level aggro skill. This loud sound couldn't help but attract the attention of the dungeon boss. The monster immediately forgot about its previous goal and rushed towards the new opponent. Zhu Donghun noticed the monster's advance and was already preparing for what would happen next. The next moment, the huge scorpion hit the skeleton's shield and stopped. At the same time, the main character's subordinate completely withstood the strong blow thanks to the low-level block skill. The necromancer was very surprised that his skeleton was able to block the attack of the dungeon boss and could not contain his joy about it. Zhu Donghun was well aware that he now had a chance to win, which he simply had to take advantage of immediately. The guy silently looked at the skeleton mage who stood behind him, making it clear that he should get ready and wait for his command. The skeleton archer was also already pulling the string of his bow because he understood perfectly well that the order was about to sound. The next moment, Zhu Donghun loudly ordered all of his subordinates to attack the dungeon boss. At the same time, a fireball and a hail of arrows rained down on the scorpion. This air attack hit the target exactly, but unfortunately it could not cause any significant damage to the monsters. The only thing that was wrong was its strong chitinous shell. At the same time, two more skeletons attacked the scorpion from the ground. Zhu Donghun believed that he didn't need to find his opponent's weak point. The main character was pleased with what was happening because he saw with his own eyes that even the dungeon boss could not stand up to a whole group of opponents. The monster was clearly unhappy that the skeletons were attacking him and even managed to cause minor damage. Because of this, he was very angry and growled loudly. Soon he got tired of all this, and so he sharply swung his tail in order to throw his opponents away from him. Despite this sudden attack, the skeletons were still able to continue fighting. Zhu Donghun was also not worried because he believed that although it was quite difficult, the attacks of his subordinates were effective. The protagonist could clearly see that he was definitely dealing damage to the dungeon boss, so he had to continue in the same spirit. The guy loudly asked his skeletons not to worry about dying and to continue attacking the monster. Suddenly, the necromancer noticed that he only had 50 units of energy left. However, this did not upset him because he knew that as long as he had this energy for summoning, his skeletons were practically invincible. That was why right now the skeleton swordsman was fearlessly rushing into battle without worrying about the consequences at all. However, everything was not as good as it could have been. The dungeon boss was far from a simple opponent, so he could only destroy the summoned skeletons alone. In place of the fallen skeleton swordsman, Zhu Donghun quickly summoned the next subordinate so that the battle could continue. He spent 10 units of energy on this. The huge scorpion seemed surprised by this because before this he had never encountered the power of the necromancer and his skills. Meanwhile, a new batch of skeletons fearlessly ran straight towards their enemy, intending to quickly destroy him. A satisfied Zhu Donghun, without hiding his excitement, loudly ordered his subordinates to leave their fear behind and attack the dungeon boss. The huge scorpion saw perfectly how the sharp sword was getting closer and closer to him and therefore could not simply ignore it. In order to protect himself from his opponents, the monster decided to use his tail with a sharp sting to destroy the skeletons before they could harm him. Despite his enormous speed, the skeleton swordsman managed to choose the perfect moment to attack and cut off the dungeon boss's tail with just one blow. Immediately after this, the main character's subordinates rushed at the scorpion in order to determine the outcome of this battle right now. The next moment, the skeleton spearman managed to thrust his weapon deep into the scorpion's head. Such a blow was certainly fatal. Zhu Donghun, who was closely watching everything from the side, was shocked to see this. For a while, he couldn't believe that his skeletons were capable of such a thing. Soon the main character received a system notification that he had defeated the ancient king of the desert scorpion, which could not but please him. After that, the guy breathed a sigh of relief because he only had 10 units of energy left, which is why the fight could have ended completely differently. Zhu Donghun couldn't help but worry that if the dungeon boss was a little stronger, he might lose this battle. The system then reported that the statuses of the skeleton swordsman and skeleton spearman had been updated. All of their stats had increased by 1 unit and their main skills by 2 units. Zhu Donghun was happy that his subordinate skills and stats had increased. He thought that it was a good reward for defeating a crank boss. The news didn't end there. The system informed the guy that he had found a poisonous iron of the ancient king of the desert scorpions which he could take with him. The main character was surprised that he received an unusual item for the battle, and without a doubt decided to take it for himself. Then the guy examined the received object. It was a small sphere that emitted strong streams of energy around itself. This view was mesmerizing. The description of this item stated that it was the essence of the king's poison, which contained about 20 types of highly toxic poisons. The protagonist could use this item as an ingredient for crafting equipment or as an ingredient for skills. It was clear that one of the skeletons was interested in this item. The summoned creature immediately turned to Zhu Donghun to tell him something. This surprised the guy. Thanks to the system, the protagonist saw that his skeleton reacted to the poisonous gland of the ancient king of the desert scorpions, and because of this, the secret condition was fulfilled. The description said that thanks to this item, the guy could make poison arrows, but in order to obtain the poison arrow skill, a certain amount of luck was needed. Zhu Donghun was very surprised when he learned that the skill could be opened in this way. Now the main character understood why the Dark Lord was constantly talking about dungeons. At the same time, the system asked the guy if he wanted to learn the poison arrow skill. Zhu Donghun confirmed his intention, after which the skeleton archer status was immediately updated. He successfully learned the skill poison arrow. After this, the system congratulated the main character on having completed the ancient king of the desert scorpion stage and on having received a reward for this completion. A bright light blinded Zhu Donghun. This indicated that he was already leaving this dungeon. Soon the necromancer found himself in that very cool forest where his adventures had begun. Here nothing reminded him of the desert or what had happened to him there. Together with the guy, those unfortunate girls who fell for the deception of the scoundrels also returned to this forest. At first it was hard for them to believe it. Still, they began to sincerely rejoice that they were actually able to survive and did not forget to thank the main character for this. Zhu Donghun happily accepted this gratitude, but he believed that this whole story was a good lesson for the girls and that in the future they should not go somewhere just because they were offered a lot of money. After this, the damned necromancer said goodbye to the girls who went their own way. Now the main character wanted to check the reward he received for completing the dungeon. The boy looked at the magical artifact that was emitting a bright light with a satisfied expression. This item was called Ancient Desert Trace and was a B rank. The boy looked at the magical artifact that was emitting a bright light with a satisfied expression. This item was called Ancient Desert Trace and was a B rank. Zhu Donghun was very surprised when he realized what the reward was. Right now the main character was looking at a large key which probably unlocked some kind of lock. The description stated that this key unlocked the secrets of hidden relics and could open the dungeon Ancient Desert. It was also bound to the hunter Zhu Donghun. The guy continued to look closely at the key and think that it was some kind of connected dungeon or something like that. While the necromancer was thinking about all this, he did not notice at all how a man with long dark hair approached him from behind. The guy really wanted someone to explain to him the meaning of this object, and it seemed like his wish was about to come true. Finally, the main character felt someone's presence behind him, and therefore turned his head to understand who was watching him. It turned out that it was Ji Soi Yul who wanted to talk to the necromancer. Her presence here greatly surprised Zhu Donghun. The girl timidly reminded the guy that he had recently asked to give him a little time to collect his thoughts, and since he had already gone into the dungeons it meant that everything had worked out. The Dark Empress also assumed that if she had not found the main character herself, he would hardly have returned to her. Zhu Donghun was shocked and did not know what to answer. Still, the guy hesitantly answered that he understood what the girl wanted from him. Then the worried protagonist began to think about what to do next. He did not know whether he should tell the truth or lie to the girl. He was also worried that Ji Soi Yul could catch him in a lie and then he would definitely be in trouble. Meanwhile, the Dark Empress stared at Zhu Donghun humbly, waiting for him to start speaking. Her frightening appearance indicated that the guy should not hesitate. The main character was very worried and did not want to get into trouble, so he thought it would be better for him to just tell the girl the truth. Moreover, Zhu Donghun was only a novice hunter who knew nothing about this world, which could play into his hands in this situation. The guy also believed that if he could use this as an opportunity to establish contact with the ranker, then he should take advantage of this opportunity. Finally, the main character clarified whether the Dark Empress wanted to know how he passed that dungeon and what reward he received for it. The next moment, the guy confidently declared that he would tell the girl everything she wanted to hear and answer all her questions. However, before he began his story, Zhu Donghun asked Ji Soi Yul for one condition. The girl was very surprised to hear this, but she was not against listening to the main character's demands. Firstly, the necromancer needed the Dark Empress to protect him while he developed. The girl was surprised again and thought that the guy owed money to someone. Zhu Donghun denied this and explained that hooligans were hunting him. Ji Soi Yul accepted this demand without objection, after which she began to listen to other conditions because she was sure that this was not the only one. Zhu Donghun continued to talk about how he was a newbie, and so the girl needed to teach him something he didn't know. After that, he demonstrated the key. The Dark Empress was very surprised to see this item in the hands of a low-ranking hunter and assumed that it was a medium. Zhu Donghun immediately asked what that meant, while thinking that this item was able to surprise even a ranker, which meant that it really was expensive. Before telling everything, the Dark Empress asked whether the main character had received this item after completing the dungeon, to which he received a positive answer. The girl then said that the necromancer was incredibly lucky because the chance of finding a medium in an ordinary dungeon was practically zero. There were less than 100 such items known in the world. In addition, they were associated with the people who found them, so they could not be simply exchanged. Zhu Donghun was surprised by this information, but what interested him most now was what this key did. Ji Soi Yul continued to say that the medium was also a kind of lucky opportunity because thanks to it, quests related to this subject appeared. These related quests gradually increased in rank and eventually reached S rank or even higher. All the mediums that Ji Soi Yul knew reached the highest level. Zhu Donghun was shocked when he heard this because before that he had no idea that this inconspicuous object was so promising for him. The Dark Empress also said that all rankers like her were desperately searching for such items. After this, the girl's mood noticeably worsened and she became sad because she again did not receive a high award. In the end, the girl agreed to accept all the conditions of the main character, which he was very happy about, and did not hide it. Unexpectedly, Ji Soy Yul interrupted this joyful moment because she still had something to say. The next moment, the Dark Empress stated that she also had her own conditions for their cooperation. After some time, Zhu Donghun was already standing at the entrance to his apartment and entering the code for the electronic lock. The protagonist quickly opened the door and allowed Ji Soy Yul to enter inside. Looking around, the girl was very surprised that a necromancer lived in such a place. The guy himself considered his home to be rather squalid, which is why he told the Dark Empress that she shouldn't have followed him here. The girl did not agree with this and insisted that the promise was a promise that she had to keep. Looking around again, Ji Soy Yul said that there were no tracking devices or skills here, so the protagonist was safe. The guy was surprised that the girl managed to check everything so quickly. Then the Dark Empress said that she confirmed the necromancer's place of residence and would remain on the roof for now. Zhu Donghun was again surprised by the girl's professionalism and couldn't even answer. Before leaving, Ji Soy Yul asked the guy to let her know when he was going to training tomorrow. The main character did not object to this. After this, the guy thought about remembering his recent conversation with the girl in the forest. The Dark Empress asked the necromancer for permission to monitor his training. Zhu Donghun was surprised by this demand because he did not understand why a girl who was a high-ranking hunter needed this. Ji Soy Yul explained that she had been observing the boy's energy since he had passed that very dungeon and noticed that the necromancer was becoming stronger exponentially. That is why the Dark Empress was very curious about how the main character managed to achieve such rapid growth. Recalling this conversation, Zhu Donghun had already managed to change his clothes but remained just as thoughtful. Now the guy was thinking about the fact that he had already told Ji Soy Yul everything about the lucky opportunity. He also told the girl everything about the master of all techniques and how their collaboration began. The main character didn't even try to hide from the Dark Empress what kind of training he had with this old man. Now Zhu Donghun had only one problem that was bothering him. Of course, this concerned the warm ghosts. The guy was sure that they were not going to give up their intentions because of one failed attempt. The main character firmly decided that if these people continue to threaten him, he will return to them as much as he receives from them. The next day arrived. For the guy, it began with an intense workout which was accompanied by a painful massage. Zhu Donghun still couldn't completely cope with the terrible pain, so he screamed at the top of his voice every time the teacher touched him. The elderly man had no intention of stopping and asked the protagonist not to react so sharply since his body had already begun to take shape. The old man was very pleased with this because it meant that his massage technique was working perfectly. Continuing to deliver strong blows, the master assumed that it was already possible to increase the intensity, and the guy himself should have understood this. Despite the good results, Zhu Donghun was still very dissatisfied with this massage and called it simple violence. These words greatly angered the old man, who seemed to be intent on demonstrating real violence right now. Despite the good results, Zhu Donghun was still very dissatisfied with this massage and called it simple violence. These words greatly angered the old man, who seemed to be intent on demonstrating real violence right now. Seeing this reaction, the main characters quickly regretted what they said and tried to calm their teacher down. Despite this, the old man could no longer be calmed down. He ordered Zhu Donghun to shut up and hit him on the back with all his might. Ji Soy Yul watched this from the side. Soon the massage ended. The guy was completely exhausted and therefore was not even happy that his pain resistance skill had been improved to rank B. The Dark Empress continued to watch closely what was happening without interfering in this process, but it seemed that she did not believe that the necromancer was becoming stronger only because of the massage. No matter how many times the girl saw all this, she could not get used to it and believe that the main character went through such training every day. Zhu Donghun explained to Ji Soy Yul everything about the old man and his unusual training. Unfortunately, the girl did not see the master of all the techniques and therefore could not repeat after him. Suddenly, the old man turned to the main character with displeasure and ordered him to get up on his feet because they still had 30 minutes left before the skill's effect ended. The guy immediately obeyed the order while saying that he knew that he shouldn't have been lying down when his level was so low. Then the necromancer thought that yesterday the skeleton spearman trained, which meant that today it was the skeleton archer's turn. Zhu Donghun admitted that his subordinates were getting stronger every day. The only problem was that the stronger they became, the more the guy had to study and train. After that, the main character opened the window of her characteristics where she paid attention to her skills, which had already accumulated quite a lot. The guy was happy with this. The skeleton swordsman had a skill called Howl, which was very useful when attacking. The skeleton spearman had the skill Farewell. He was also quite effective in attacking. The skeleton archer always hit his target thanks to his shooting skill. The skeleton who wielded the shield used the defense skill to prevent enemy attacks from harming him and his comrades. The main character learned all these skills except for the skills of the skeleton who was a magician. In order to learn his skill, Zhu Donghun first needed to learn how to use chi energy. While the boy was thinking about all this, the elderly man had already drawn a circle on the ground with an unusual pattern inside. Next, the master of all techniques ordered the main character to sit in this circle and sit in it with his legs crossed. The guy asked without enthusiasm whether he should just sit. To this, the old man asked the necromancer to read the formula for the great blue heart technique that he had taught him last time. The older man warned the boy not to say it thoughtlessly because now he needed to concentrate and feel how the formless energy moved. Zhu Donghun closed his eyes and began to remember how the formula of the great blue heart technique he had learned sounded. Soon the guy began to pronounce the words out loud, thinking about each phrase and diligently concentrating on it. At this time he heard the voice of his teacher, who said that breathing was the most important step in this technique. If he could not feel the energy of qi, then the training would be intensified. Hearing this, Zhu Donghun realized that he had no choice but to do his best, because in truth, he didn't want his training to intensify at all. The main character assumed that if he could become stronger, he would be able to endure all the grueling training, but for this he needed to feel the energy of qi. Despite the late hour, lights were on in many windows of multi-story buildings. Ji Soi Yul silently watched the city at night from the roof of the house and thought meticulously about the past day. The girl still couldn't believe that Zhu Donghun had actually become that strange old man's disciple. The Dark Empress remembered very well how many times that dungeon boss had thrown her. The girl thought that it was simply terrible and therefore did not want anything like that to happen again. Previously, Ji Soi Yul thought that all this was possible due to a lucky break, but the protagonist's determination and ability to endure pain proved that it was hard work. Then the Dark Empress decided that she had no other choice for now, and for now she had to just watch the main character. The girl also thought hard about the fact that the old man with whom she could do nothing in the dungeon was now next to Zhu Donghun. I just watch as the guy stopped stronger than Ji Soi Yul thought that someday she herself would be able to overcome her boundaries. While Zhu Donghun was fast asleep in his bed, the Dark Empress, who was guarding his sleep, was very interested in how strong this guy would become. In order to find out, she was ready to closely observe the main character's training and track all the results. Meanwhile, work continued at the main office of the Hidden Shadows Guild despite the late hour. The head of the guild poured himself a glass of red wine while listening to his subordinate's report. The man in the mask seemed nervous because he understood that he had brought his boss some bad news. The man with the scar on his face rudely asked if his subordinates really needed support because of Ji Soi Yul's interference. The masked man immediately confirmed this and very much hoped that his request would not be ignored. The owner of the Hidden Shadows Guild was ranked 92nd in the world and worked under the pseudonym Cerberus. His name was Nick Jacan, and he didn't really want to interact with the Parang Guild. The unexpected masked man bowed respectfully and asked for forgiveness because he understood that he should have sorted everything out himself before Ji Soi Yul intervened. Nick Jacan thought for a while, tapping his finger, "I'll put it." Finally, he asked if this was really the opportunity that would allow him to keep the rankers in his hands. The agitated killer immediately confirmed this and added that this difficult woman showed interest in this situation. After thinking a little more, Nick Jacan admitted that all this was tempting for him. Suddenly, Cerberus loudly snapped his fingers as if calling someone to him. Soon a woman with a strong, ominous aura approached the guild leader. She bowed respectfully to the man and prepared to listen to his order. Nick Jacan asked her what the work schedule of Hidden Shadows was. The girl replied that they were fully booked for the next month. Hearing this, the man thought for a moment as if he was puzzled by this answer. Then he asked what rank Zhu Donghun had. The masked man quickly replied that the protagonist was just an A-rank hunter. Nick Jacan realized that the guy still had a long way to go. Then the head of the guild nevertheless agreed to intervene in this situation and asked that his subordinate clarify his schedule in a month. The man decided to take a personal look at Zhu Donghun. It seemed that the guy was very interested in him. The next day for the necromancer's curse began as usual with an intensive workout. Now she was doing abdominal exercises. Ji Soyul was watching all of this from the side, still interested in how the necromancer managed to become stronger every day. Soon the protagonist reached 40 repetitions of the abdominal exercise, which was his goal for today, so now he could relax. The guy fell to the ground exhausted and breathed a sigh of relief. Now he needed some time to rest in order to continue training after this. Unexpectedly, Ji Soyul approached the necromancer, probably wanting to "what are you talking about" with him. Although Zhu Donghun needed rest and peace, he decided not to refuse the girl a conversation. Ji Soyul began to silently approach the main character closer, so that what she would say next would be taken more seriously. The next moment, the Dark Empress said in an uncertain voice that she had to say something to the guy. Suddenly, the Dark Empress said in an uncertain voice that she had to tell the protagonist something. Zhu Donghun was surprised by this, but was even more confused by the seriousness with which the girl began to speak. Ji Soyul reminded that she promised to protect the guy from any danger until he became stronger. Zhu Donghun remembered this, but at that time he did not expect that the Dark Empress would be watching him 24 hours a day. To this, the girl replied that she did not know any other way to protect the main character except to constantly watch him. This surprised the guy because Ji Soyul was a ranker who was supposed to go through dungeons and do guild business instead of spying on him. This was exactly what the girl wanted to talk about. She had been looking after Zhu Donghun for several weeks now, and although she had neglected the guild's affairs, she had things she needed to do. She then said that now the main character had two options to choose from. The boy could either follow the Dark Empress for 6 hours, or use the medium key he received after completing the dungeon. It was clear that Zhu Donghun was interested in the option using the key. The protagonist immediately took the item trace of the ancient desert into his hand. This key could open the ancient desert dungeon and was only bound to the hunter Zhu Donghun. The girl said that the medium was a tied object, which means it could have been a solitary dungeon in which the guy would probably be safer to be, since even rankers would not be able to get in there. After thinking for a bit, the main character said that it was a brank dungeon and perhaps it was even more dangerous for him to be inside. Hearing this, Ji Soyul was in no hurry to answer and only smiled slightly, as if she had learned much more about this dungeon. Still, the girl answered that the main character was not entirely right because he himself probably did not notice how he became stronger. The Dark Empress then insisted that going through this dungeon was a good opportunity to test the necromancer's powers. Ji Soyul continued to say that judging by what she saw, the main character was already able to go through this dungeon on his own. Because of these words, Zhu Donghun was very embarrassed and couldn't believe that he had just been praised by a ranker. Before this, everyone considered the main character to be just an abnormal necromancer who was only capable of small deeds. No one even acknowledged the guy as an rank mercenary due to his weakness. That was why the words of the high-ranking hunter left a great impression on Zhu Donghun. For a while, he couldn't believe that he had finally received someone's recognition. Then the main character squeezed his valuable reward in his hand more tightly, having already made his choice. The next moment, the satisfied guy confidently replied that he was choosing the second option because it was a really good idea. Ji Soyul knew that this was how it would be. Then she suggested leaving immediately. Zhu Donghun didn't object because he had already finished his morning training anyway. The girl then said that in order for the dungeon to appear, the main character had to pour his energy into the key and then it would activate. At first, the guy looked at the girl with uncertainty because he didn't fully understand what he should do and what result to expect. Still, he decided to simply trust the words of the Dark Empress and began to pour his energy into the key, causing it to glow brightly. The main character was amazed by this radiance and at the same time pleased that everything worked out for him. System notifications informed the guy that he could already open the dungeon Ancient Desert, but warned that it was a single dungeon. Before setting off on his adventure, Zhu Donghun looked at the Dark Empress and promised that he would return soon. To this, Ji Soyul only nodded her head slightly, thus wishing the guy good luck. After that, the light began to become brighter and brighter, which made Zhu Donghun become very enthusiastic about what was happening. A moment later, the main character had already moved to another world and felt that he was standing on soft sand. Looking around, the guy was very surprised at the dungeon he found himself in. The system informed Zhu Donghun that he had entered the ancient desert dungeon and was able to discover a pyramid there. Don't waste time, the main character concentrated energy in his staff because he didn't even know what might await him ahead. Then the guy called upon all his awakened skeletons to make sure that he would not be left here without protection. Approaching the pyramid, the necromancer thought that he should not rush, after which he assumed that the dungeon should have been located inside the pyramid itself. Before entering, the protagonist addressed his subordinates and ordered them to maintain formation and follow him. One of the skeletons nodded his head approvingly, letting his master know that they would all humbly carry out this order. Then Zhu Donghun began to smile wickedly and thought that since they were only D rank, they were too weak for this dungeon. That was why the protagonist decided that they needed to fight like the weak. After that, Zhu Donghun began to open the stone door that led to the pyramid. As soon as the guy touched the door, it immediately began to open automatically simultaneously, making a loud screeching noise. Soon the way was clear and the main character and his subordinates could enter without hindrance. Zhu Donghun was pleased that it was all so simple and he didn't have to solve any puzzles. Then the guy slowly took a few steps forward, thinking that at this stage he had nothing to worry about. Suddenly the system notified him that a connection had been discovered between the dungeon and the hunter Zhu Donghun. The guy didn't understand what this meant. Then the main character read that the dungeon had transformed and now he could not leave it. This slightly frightened the necromancer. The next moment Zhu Donghun heard loud sounds behind him and turned his head to see that the stone door was closing, no longer giving him the opportunity to get out. Very soon the exit was completely walled up and thus the main character found himself trapped. Soon a strong wind arose in the dark corridors which tried to knock the main character and his subordinates off their feet. The skeleton had to protect himself with a shield to withstand this wind. However, the wind turned out to be stronger and was able to throw the said guests into the depths of the dungeon. Zhu Donghun couldn't stay on his feet and fell to the floor. Only after that did everything stop and absolute silence reigned in the dark corridors. After some time, the guy finally came to his senses and began to slowly rise to his feet. Zhu Donghun was not very happy that after he had entered the pyramid so confidently, he found himself in such a situation. Then the guy turned to the skeleton archer, making it clear that his skills would soon be very useful to them. Along with this, the main character is glad that his skeletons were here with him and thought that first he should have explored the surrounding situation. After that, the skeleton archer used his safe vision skill and launched an arrow far ahead. This arrow emitted a bright light around itself. Thanks to it, it was possible to examine in detail the spacious room in which the main character was now located together with his subordinates. Zhu Donghun, seeing all this, thought that at the end of the dark corridor there was an open space which made him suspicious. Still, the guy began to walk forward, thinking along the way about whether this was the right path at all. Despite his doubts, Zhu Donghun continued to move forward because he simply had no other choice. Suddenly, the main character saw a bright light in front of him that appeared out of nowhere. The guy had to squint his eyes to avoid going blind. He didn't understand what was happening at all. Soon the system reported that the necromancer had discovered the building of the offense of the solar spear. In the depths of the pyramid were hidden warriors and the absolute ruler of the ancient empire of the desert sun spear. The system explained that Zhu Donghun needed to break through the skeleton army and reach the sun spear. The main character, having learned what kind of test awaited him in this dungeon, was shocked because he could not have expected anything like this. A torrential rain completely engulfed a small settlement located in the desert. Despite the abundance of moisture and coolness in the arid region, one of the residents did not seem to like it very much. Suddenly, the unknown creature abruptly spread its black wings, causing several feathers to fly to the sides. At that very moment, the man with the mustache loudly called someone a monster and an insignificant creature. The other men supported their friend and began to ask with displeasure how the half-breed dared to think that he could fit into their company. The man to whom all these insults were addressed tried to contain his emotions while thinking about the fact that some people wanted to cut off his hands as soon as he was born. Some people tried to cut off the guy's ankles. Because of this, he was always an outcast and tried to have less contact with other residents of this settlement. However, it didn't help because in the end someone took the boy's eyes. And even now, one of the men armed with a knife intended to attack the guy, sincerely wanting to kill him. Despite his injury, the mysterious guy was able to attack his opponent much earlier and thus protect himself. The sharp spear easily pierced the body without any movement, giving him no chance of survival. The blind guy clearly heard how after his precise answer the lifeless body of the man fell to the ground with a crash. A few more moments later, the mysterious man with wings armed with a spear began to listen to the sound of the rain. No one dared to insult him anymore. The guy was very sad that people were trying to take away what belonged to him. Tears rolled down the boy's cheek and fell into a puddle, but no one saw it. The guy really didn't want to do something like this, but he had already decided that he would take back everything that belonged to his offenders. The army of armed skeletons stood quietly in place waiting for the order from their boss. Zhu Donghun, realizing the situation he was in, was alarmed and did not know how to fix everything. Suddenly the guy saw a system message that asked him to be careful because the Drank Spear skeletons were already approaching him. Without wasting time, the main character ordered his subordinate, who owned a shield, to block the advance of the enemy army. Then the guy thought that it was dangerous for him to fight in the open, and now he needed to lure all these skeletons into the corridor where he had a chance to win. Zhu Donghun was confident that only a limited number of enemies would be able to enter the corridor, and in that case it would be possible to hold out and destroy several skeletons at once. While the main character was thinking about all this, the aggressively minded skeletons were attacking the uninvited guests who had disturbed their peace. The necromancer's subordinate was still able to effectively contain the spearman's attacks by gradually retreating back and covering himself with a shield. At the same time, another summoned skeleton attacked the opponents from a safe distance in order to reduce their numbers. The skeleton swordsman also did not stand aside and did not deal crushing blows to opponents who intended to harm his master. Zhu Donghun was completely focused on this battle and thought that everything was fine so far and his Paran was working well. However, the guy was worried that at this rate the wine tolerance of his subordinate, who owned the shield, would sooner or later reach its limit. In order not to lose this battle prematurely, the main character loudly ordered his skeleton not just to defend themselves thoughtlessly but to slowly retreat back. Suddenly, one of the opponents, who had previously fallen to the floor, grabbed the leg of the summoned skeleton. This threatened to disrupt the battle formation. The next moment, the skull of this skeleton was pierced by an arrow that pierced it with great speed. This was thanks to the skeleton archer. Zhu Donghun was pleased with how things were going and believed that they would defeat the opponents one by one and aim for the next target. While the guy was thinking about this, he didn't notice how several sharp spears were approaching him at once. The main character was very scared when he saw the danger approaching. It seemed that, because of this, he would not have time to dodge and would definitely get hurt. Surprisingly, the necromancer quickly pulled himself together and completely suppressed his fear. He was definitely not ready to die in such a way. The next moment, Zhu Donghun suddenly grabbed the spear that could harm him with his hand. Immediately after this, the skeleton swordsman attacked the very enemy who wanted to kill his master. The joyful protagonist praised his subordinate for his excellent work. All this time, only one skeleton remained unnoticed on the battlefield, and now he was going to show himself to the fullest because he considered this a good moment. It was a skeleton magician who, with the help of his magic wand, created a huge fireball above his head. The summoned creature managed to easily direct the deadly charge straight into the crowd of opponents, causing a loud explosion. This attack turned out to be quite effective, as it was able to completely neutralize several skeletons at once. Despite this, it did nothing to stop the other skeletons, who continued their advance. They walked over the bodies of their fallen comrades without a shadow of a doubt, just to achieve their goal. The army of skeletons was advancing forward without delay, so the main character had to be on the alert. Zhu Donghun, seeing the approaching enemies, understood that all the efforts made up until this point were insufficient. Despite this, the main character did not lose heart and was fully prepared to continue this battle, as if he already had some more effective idea. The shield-wielding skeleton diligently performed his duties and protected his master from any danger. The skeleton's spears crashed against the strong shield with a roar, but they were unable to penetrate it at all. It seemed to be a very effective strategy. Unfortunately, everything was not as easy as we would have liked. After several attempts, the enemies managed to pierce the faithful subordinate of the necromancer. Seeing this, Zhu Donghun wasted no time in concentrating the energy in his staff to use his head skill. The protagonist spent 10 units of energy and quickly summoned a new skeleton with a shield, which took its place in the line. The opponents, seeing this, were very surprised because they did not understand at all how this was possible. Meanwhile, Zhu Donghun was thinking that he would just pick up a new spear if this one broke and continue stabbing it into his enemies. After that, the guy fearlessly rushed into battle, and using the piercing skill, he could easily defeat dangerous skeletons. However, no matter how hard the guy tried, there was no end to the opponents, and even now one of the skeletons was quickly heading towards him to attack. Zhu Donghun had to dodge some of the attacks, but despite that, he still felt quite confident. Some time passed at this pace. A real battle raged in the dungeon, in which all methods were used to neutralize the skeletons. After some time, it was all over. Zhu Donghun was breathing heavily and trying to recover from such a difficult battle. In the center of the spacious room, only one skeleton remained standing. The system reported that the solar spear which had been sleeping in the pyramid had awakened and was now watching the main character. It mocked the guy, considering that he would not be able to cope with it with such skills. This greatly angered the main character. The guy looked at the skeleton who was laughing at him and thought that of course he didn't know who this solar spear was. However, Zhu Donghun remembered well that he had cleared a dungeon much worse than this one and killed an old man that even a ranker couldn't defeat. After this, the guy turned to his subordinates and confidently said that they would go further because their opponent had really screwed him over. The guy confidently walked forward, thinking that no matter what was ahead, they needed to get to the dungeon boss. Suddenly, the system warned the main character about the danger because 100 ancient skeletons were already approaching him. Zhu Donghun was shocked to see another army of enemies in front of him, which he had to fight again. The guy couldn't believe that this dungeon had a feature related to the generation of an infinite number of skeletons until he reached the goal. The main character was afraid that at this rate this battle would never end, so he decided that he had to get to the dungeon boss as soon as possible. The opponents continued to mercilessly attack the shield, but fortunately it remained just as strong and could perform its functions. Suddenly the main character turned to his subordinate and asked him to give him the shield because this time he wanted to be the one who absorbed all the damage. The guy handled this duty well and held the shield in his hands confidently. Zhu Donghun also turned to the skeleton mage and asked him to cast the air shield skill on him. Meanwhile, the rest of his subordinates were to cover him. The guy decided that they would ignore the normal mobs and run straight to the dungeon boss room. He thought that he would either be able to run to the target or fall earlier. The main character decided to bet his life on this because there were so many enemies that he had no other choice. Without wasting time, the main character pushed off the ground with his foot and quickly ran forward in order to avoid obstacles. The army of skeletons was not at all frightened by the advancing uninvited guests and was already preparing to eliminate this threat. Zhu Donghun and his subordinates quickly ran forward, thinking along the way that he had little strength left, but he had to continue fighting to push back the opponents. With the thought that if he breaks his left arm, he will use his right, the protagonist took several blows from the spears on the shield. It was not as painless as it might seem at first glance, but the guy endured these difficulties and prepared for a counterattack. The next moment, Zhu Donghun used his shield as a weapon and powerfully attacked several opponents at once. After that, the guy continued to run forward with a furious scream on his lips, knocking down hostile skeletons along the way. Soon, the protagonist received a system notification that he had to break through the obstacles and get to the solar spear. Zhu Donghun took this message as his main goal, so we will continue to quickly run forward while attacking several opponents at once. The protagonist really hoped that he simply had to get to a creature called the Solar Spear in order for the attacks of the skeleton Arnia to stop. Of course, his subordinates, who also took an active part in the battle, also fled along with the guy. The summoned skeletons protected the main character from the flanks, preventing the enemies from getting around their master from the side. Despite the danger all around, Zhu Donghun only felt sorry for one thing, and for that reason he continued to run. In this undoubtedly tense moment, the main character was only thinking about how he needed to hold on a little longer. The guy already saw in front of him that very doorway that led to another room. It seemed that this was exactly what the necromancer needed. The main character ran so fast that he couldn't follow his feet at all and ended up falling to the floor, but he still managed to get to the right place. Suddenly, Zhu Donghun heard an ominous voice asking how such a pitiful person dared to challenge him with such skill. The guy was not pleased to hear these words because he was only an rank hunter, but he gave all his strength to this matter. Soon, the protagonist heard the familiar sound of bony feet stamping on the floor. This indicated that the enemy was approaching again. Zhu Donghun was very dissatisfied because he had hoped not to cross paths with the skeleton army again. Despite the main character's wishes, this dungeon had completely different plans, so the guy had to take part in another battle. Zhu Donghun was very angry because even though he seemed to have fulfilled all the skeleton's conditions, there was still simply no end. The protagonist's subordinates fought desperately against superior enemy forces and were not going to give up easily. Despite this, their loyalty could not protect them from the sharp spears, so the summoned skeletons needed to be replaced from time to time. Zhu Donghun knew that if he continued to fight, he would definitely die, so he needed to focus on running forward no matter what. Then the main character again jumped up from his place and together with his subordinates quickly ran forward to meet the enemies. Along the way he tried to inflict as much damage as possible on the skeleton army, not forgetting to curse the dungeon and the fact that he ended up there. After some time, the tired Ju Donghun stopped to catch his breath and recover from breaking through the enemy lines. Looking forward, the guy unexpectedly saw a huge mountain which was located right in the middle of the room. Taking a closer look, the main character realized that this entire mountain consisted of human bones. The guy immediately assumed that these were the bones of those numerous skeletons that he had just defeated. This could not help but surprise him. After this, Ju Donghun realized that he was simply running in circles. Because of this, the main character began to get angry and think that in the end, regardless of whether he goes forward or backward, he will have to face the enemy army again. At that moment, ominous sounds were heard in the depths of the dark corridor, which immediately attracted the attention of the necromancer and his subordinates. Soon the protagonist saw the approach of another group of hostile skeletons whom he had to fight. Ju Donghun was not at all happy with this and began to think about what he should do in this situation. The main character had the option to fight his opponents or simply surrender. By this time, the guy only had 20 units of energy left, which made long-term resistance impossible. However, Ju Donghun quickly calculated that out of the large army of skeletons, only about 30 opponents remained. Still, the main character felt that he had no choice and had to hold out against the aggressive skeletons as long as possible. That is why the necromancer loudly ordered his subordinates not to allow the enemies to approach him. The skeletons, having heard this order, immediately began to carry it out. The skeleton swordsman and the spearmen fearlessly rushed into battle in order to buy some time for their master. At the same time, Ju Donghun quickly looked around to find the best path to move forward without encountering the enemy. The guy decided to climb over the mountain of bones while his subordinates would fight for him. The main character encouraged himself and told himself that he had to gather his strength because there were no dungeons that were not cleared. Despite his fatigue, the boy was soon able to climb to the very top of the mountain where he was relatively safe. At this point, the system once again reminded the necromancer that he had to break through the obstacle and get to the solar spear. The guy began to look around to understand where this solar spear was and suddenly turned his attention to the ceiling of the dungeon. A huge cloud of energy was visible on the ceiling, which like a funnel sucked in air. Ju Donghun immediately assumed that this was perhaps exactly what he was looking for. In order to make sure that his assumption was correct, the main character, without wasting time, loudly addressed the skeleton who owned the shield. The guy ordered his subordinate to quickly climb up to him and throw him up as hard as he could. At that moment, the main character again heard that same ominous voice that laughed because the necromancer finally noticed him. The voice continued calling the guy a stupid man and asking him to come to him if he dared to do so. The otherworldly creature threatened to turn the necromancer into ashes. Despite these threats, Ju Donghun kicked his subordinate's shield hard to see who would ultimately win this battle. The skeleton put all its efforts into throwing the protagonist high up, thanks to which he quickly headed towards the clot of ominous energy. Ju Donghun was getting closer and closer, but he still didn't see anything out of the ordinary, so he continued to stare upward. Suddenly, two glowing lights appeared in the dark part of the funnel. It could be assumed that these were the eyes of the boss of this dungeon, who was burning with rage. Despite the serious danger, the main character was not at all scared, and his incredible anger forced him to put his hand forward to grab his opponent. As soon as the guy stuck his hand into the clot of otherworldly energy, the system congratulated him on having reached the solar spear. Immediately after this, the ancient skeletons that had caused the main character a lot of trouble on the way here began to disappear. Ju Donghun was very happy to see this because now he had noticeably fewer problems. Now the main character really wanted to see the dungeon boss who was hiding in a clot of ominous energy. As soon as the guy tried to get his opponent, the system asked him to be careful because the solar spear was summoned. Then Ju Donghun heard strange sounds coming from the funnel and scared him a little. The next moment, the guy was illuminated by a bright light, and the system reported the use of the memory restoration skill, and that the necromancer would be moved in the near future. A strong wind raised thick clouds of dust which obscured the already lifeless landscape. The young man with wings behind his back confidently raised his weapon as if preparing for battle. Without wasting any time, the guy pointed the spear at his enemy, not wanting to show him any mercy. At the same time, an armed man was already running towards the guy, wishing him death. Unfortunately for this man, his opponent's skills were much more advanced, so he had no choice but to die from the solar spear. Along with the murders, the guy said that his enemies were the ones who started to bully him and isolated him, so they shouldn't accuse him of cruelty. Thanks to his strong character and ability to deal with enemies, the guy quickly gained recognition, and now no one dared to mock him anymore. People worshipped the sun spear and called him the greatest hero born in the desert empire. Everyone was ready to follow him. One of the preachers begged the boy to save them and lead their poor souls. Sunspear took these requests with a sly smile on his face, as if he had no intention of helping anyone. The people were on their knees and continued to beg the guy, but he replied that the people shouldn't even hope for salvation. He was sure that in order for this desert to survive, it needed only one thing, namely human deaths. Suddenly the boy raised his weapon up and loudly ordered the soldiers to follow his example. The soldiers immediately obeyed and demonstrated their determination to their new leader. Absolutely everyone was ready to carry out any order of the solar spear because they considered him the chosen one. Then the solar spear loudly commanded that people should henceforth kill each other, mercilessly exterminate their relatives, and burn everything to ashes like a dried-up sun. After this, the guy started laughing loudly like some kind of madman. This laughter echoed throughout the square and demonstrated the final victory of the solar spear over its enemies. At this point, the system notified the protagonist that his memory restoration skill had finished its entire action. Eyes, Dong-hun quickly got used to the bright light, so he was able to see what was happening in front of him. At first, the guy saw the dark silhouette of a mysterious man whose face was partially covered by large wings. As soon as this man flapped his wings and showed himself to Zhu, Dong-hun realized what kind of guy was standing in front of him now. The necromancer was sure that this was the same solar spear that he had just seen in his memories. The main character was very surprised at how strong this boss was, and because of this she simply could not believe that this dungeon was only B rank. Besides, Zhu, Dong-hun admitted that the sun spear was very similar in strength and skills to the master of all techniques, so the battle with him was going to be very difficult. Meanwhile, the solar spear in an ominous voice called the protagonist a vile and evil person. He was very unhappy with Zhu's appearance. That's why Dong-hun suddenly rushed at the guy to teach him a lesson. The beautiful necromancer saw how the sharp spear was getting closer and closer to his neck, but he could not do anything with it. Out of fear, the main character closed his eyes, fearing that his opponent would simply kill him. Suddenly someone grabbed the guy's arm tightly and pulled him aside. Thanks to this, the attack of the sun spear did not achieve its target, as Zhu, Dong-hun remained unharmed, although very scared. Sun spear didn't see what happened, but he couldn't believe that he missed. Meanwhile, the master of all techniques, who appeared out of nowhere, asked his student with displeasure if he couldn't control himself. Dong-hun didn't understand how the old man ended up here. The main character didn't have the energy or strength to summon a skeleton or a master of all techniques, so it was unclear how the old man appeared here. Meanwhile, the embittered sun spear asked in a rough voice if his opponent had really dodged his attack. Gritting his teeth in anger, the guy turned his head to his opponent and asked if he really thought that a simple person could resist the technique of his spear. After that, the solar spear sharply pushed off the ground and lightning fast headed towards the main character in order to finish what had been started. At the right moment, the master of all techniques used a skill called Absolute Shield. This helped protect the frightened Zhu, Dong-hun, from the enemy's quick attack. However, the main character still lost his balance out of fear and fell to the ground with a crash. The old man was dissatisfied with his student and called him a stupid boy because he could not distinguish between illusion and reality. The master's words greatly surprised Zhu, Dong-hun, and prompted him to think. In order to confirm his suspicions, the main character put his hand forward, as if trying to feel the space around him. In the end, the guy realized that all this was unreal. The master of all techniques confirmed this and added that this place existed only in the mind of his student. The old man also said that while the necromancer was unconscious, this guy with the solar spear invaded his mind. Then the old man asked the main character to step aside for now because this was not the kind of enemy he could face. The old man found it exciting that he was about to fight the monster that ruled the world. The master of all techniques admitted that this guy's skills in wielding a spear were several times stronger than his. Zhu, Dong-hun was very surprised to hear this and asked if everything was really that bad. The old man explained that he was only talking about spear skills, but overall the enemy was weaker than him. After that, the old man took a fighting stance while being surprised that only after death he found entertainment for himself. Now he did not regret that he chose the main character as his student. When all the preparations were completed, the old man looked at the sun's spear with a stern gaze and ordered it to attack. At that very moment, the guy spread his wings and rushed forward to deal with the old man who had suddenly appeared and interfered with him. Sun's spear made sharp swings with his weapon, shouting loudly along the way that a common man had only once dared to stand in his way. Now the guy really wanted to take revenge on all the people who gouged out his eyes for no reason and mercilessly took away his freedom. While carrying out another attack, the solar spear swore that he would make people experience the same pain that he experienced. Despite this, the master of all techniques had no intention of showing pity or being lenient towards his opponent, so he skillfully blocked all of his attacks. The main character, watching all this from the side, suddenly realized that the movements of the solar spear were a little familiar to him. Then the guy remembered that as soon as he entered the pyramid, he received a system notification that a connection had been discovered between this dungeon and the profession of Hunter Zhu. The necromancer continued to watch the movements of his opponent while thinking about everything he had seen in this dungeon. Suddenly, the main character paid special attention to the sharp swing of the solar spear, which reminded him of something. These movements were very similar to those performed by one of the main character's skeletons during their training. Now Zhu Donghun clearly saw the perfect similarity between the movements of his subordinate and the solar spear. The necromancer was shocked by this discovery and could not believe that his guess was actually correct. At this point, the system informed the protagonist that the solar spear's resentment was immeasurable, so it was necessary to subdue it in order to achieve the true awakening of the second-level skeleton. Don't waste time. Zhu Donghun turned to his teacher to tell him everything. The old man was very pleased that the guy was interfering in this battle because he believed that he was not yet ready to fight such a strong opponent. To this, the main character confidently stated that it was he who had to do this, and so he asked the teacher for permission to deal with the solar spear. The system notified the protagonist that the solar spear had switched its attention and was now looking angrily at him. The guy completely ignored the master of all techniques and was now focused only on the main character. Zhu Donghun started to get a little nervous because of this, not yet knowing how he was going to deal with this opponent. Meanwhile, the old man was asking his student what he was going to do and if he had any way to defeat the sun spear. The guy said that this creature was his summoned skeleton, so he was the one who had to defeat it. The elderly man was very surprised by this statement and did not understand how this was possible. Meanwhile, the necromancer confidently stood on his feet, thinking along the way that from the very beginning it was precisely his consciousness and not the master of all techniques. Zhu Donghun calmly said that it was his mind, so he alone had to deal with the enemy. The guy looked at his enemy fearlessly and thought that until his hatred runs out and until he runs out of steam, he will not give up. Then the main character took a fighting stance, thereby showing that he was ready for battle. The sun spear, sensing the guy's determination, became very angry and called him a dirty man. The guy prepared his weapon for battle while continuing to call the main character a lying, vile person. Zhu Donghun already understood that he had a tough battle ahead of him, so he was mentally preparing himself because it would happen. Meanwhile, the embittered sun spear asked if the necromancer really thought he could understand him. He believed that everything he had experienced was not given to anyone to understand, therefore Zhu's confidence Donghuna only made him laugh. Then the solar spear loudly declared that he hated people and therefore cursed them. After this, he raised his weapon high, showing that this was the end of the conversation. The next moment, the guy rushed at the main character with lightning speed, simultaneously wishing him death. Zhu Donghun was very scared because he clearly saw how the sharp spear was quickly approaching him. In the end, the boy was unable to defend himself from this attack, causing the cold weapon to penetrate deep into his body. Blood splashed in all directions from Zhu Donghun screamed in pain. Despite this, the solar spear did not even think of stopping and was already preparing for the next attack. Meanwhile, the master of all techniques calmly watched as his student was subjected to one attack after another and hoped that the guy knew what he was doing. Another attack from the solar spear once again caused the protagonist's blood to fly around in large splashes. In the end, the necromancer fell to the ground exhausted and could barely move. Even though the guy used the pain resistance skill, he still felt severe discomfort caused by his opponent's attacks. Sunny Spear, gritting his teeth in anger, was observed by the main character. I hope that he has already asked himself. However, Zhu Donghun said he was still okay. Rising to his feet, the guy asked his opponent to give him all his resentment. Sun Spear did not expect this at all. Meanwhile, Zhu Donghun used his skills to obtain a weapon that would help them continue this battle. Soon the exhausted protagonist tightly clutched the spear in his hand, thereby showing that he had not yet given up. In addition, all the wounds of the guy who left him the solar spear began to quickly heal, and the blood seemed to evaporate right before our eyes. Zhu Donghun looked at his opponent fearlessly and asked him to take out all his resentment on him. The embittered Sun Spear was skeptical of this proposal. He also didn't like what the protagonist was saying to his resentment. The guy asked if the necromancer really thought he could bear his insult. Suddenly, the solar spear loudly declared that it was impossible even if the protagonist fully understood it. After this, the guy suddenly jumped up again and headed towards his opponent in order to take revenge for his arrogant words. Zhu Donghun saw his opponent approaching and quickly got into a fighting stance and prepared to repel his attack. Surprisingly, the protagonist managed to repel a whole series of attacks from the solar spear despite his skill. At some point, two sharp spears clashed again in battle, causing a loud sound of impact on metal to spread around. Zhu Donghun confidently held back his opponent's onslaught, even though it took him a lot of effort. Meanwhile, the solar spear said that in this world there was no one who would be on his side because he was a hybrid between a man and an eagle monster. The guy was sure that there was no one anywhere who would like someone like him. Zhu Donghun was unable to withstand the onslaught of his angry opponent, which caused him to eventually lose his weapon and thus be left completely defenseless. Sun Spear continued to loudly talk about how he should not have been born because people had been stabbing him with knives since birth. The guy mercilessly attacked the main character and continued to tell with hatred in his voice that people took his eyes, tried to take his hands and ankles. From the wounds Zhu received, Donghun had already started coughing up blood, while Sun Spear was asking if his opponent knew how terrible the pain was. The exhausted necromancer stood on his knees among the splashes of his own blood, but still tried to find the strength to answer his opponent. Sun Spear silently looked at the guy whose body was shaking from pain and waited for what he would tell him. Finally, the main character will answer that the guy's life must have been hard. This answer impressed the solar spear a little because he probably did not expect to hear words of understanding from another person. However, the guy continued to remember that there were people who felt sorry for him. However, in the end, all people turned out to be the same. They were afraid of the guy and hit him in the back. All this continued until the emotions of the solar spear died. People became synonymous with lies and betrayal for him. The guy mercilessly attacked the main character, insisting that everyone treated him like a monster, so it was no surprise that he eventually became one. Zhu Donghun steadfastly endured all the blows of his opponent and wondered if this was really the process of accepting the insult. However, the main character noticed that with each attack the solar spear gradually became weaker. His rage was cut off and the resentment passed. The necromancer felt that he did not have much time left to endure, and that soon his self-sacrifice would bear fruit. After another attack by Zhu Donghun turned to the Sun Spear and asked how long he was going to continue to be sad. The necromancer also asked who would ultimately suffer if his opponent was going to continue to endure the pain. Taking his spear in his hand and pointing it at the guy, the main character insisted that he should think about his words. Attacking Zhu's Sun Spear Donghun, he said that he knew the cause of his pain very well and could therefore easily get rid of it. Once again disarming his opponent, the solar spear loudly demanded that he not try to judge him as he pleased. However, the guy restrains his anger and still admits that he really knew the cause of his pain. However, the guy did not understand that the main character was trying to change with his words because his emotions disappeared and left scars that will never heal. Zhu Donghun agreed with this and said that the past has not forgotten to change. Suddenly, the guy extended his hand to his opponent and said that he only wanted to offer him a chance to be reborn. Sun Spear was shocked to hear this, as he had never expected to receive such an offer from another person. The guy began to get noticeably nervous because he didn't fully understand what the necromancer wanted to say when he offered him to be reborn. Zhu Donghun explained that the solar spear had long since died and had become a restless spirit who was still tormented. At the same time, those who tormented him were no longer alive because he had killed them all. Hearing this, the solar spear became noticeably calmer. He agreed with the words of the main character and also remembered something else. He buried himself in this pyramid after killing all the people he hated and considered traitors. Now the guy wondered if he could live a new life without paying attention to the grievances from the past. Sun Spear lowered his weapon and looked at the main character and tried to understand what he wanted to tell him. The guy asked incredulously if it was Zhu Donghun wanted him to start living in a new way. The necromancer confidently confirmed this and added that it was not a question of whether it was right or not. The guy certainly didn't mean that the people who destroyed the Sun Spear's past life were right. Also, the main character didn't claim that the guy who killed countless people was right. Slowly approaching his opponent Zhu Donghun, he claimed that now he needed to do what he had not been able to do in his past life. The main character wanted to convey to the guy the idea that he needed to enjoy the things he wanted to do. These words made Sun Spear think about the things he wanted to do in his past life. Zhu Donghun grabbed his opponent's weapon and continued to insist that he needed to focus on this instead of endlessly feeling resentment. Then the main character was caught taking the spear, but the guy still held it tightly in his hand. Then Zhu Donghun, he said that even if only for a moment, he clearly felt the past of the solar spear. The necromancer felt what exactly caused the guy pain and what emotions he experienced. He also knew what exactly the solar spear wanted. Zhu Donghun had no intention of hiding this information from his opponent. The guy said that in these memories he saw that the solar spear most of all wanted to see the world. Sun Spear was very surprised to hear this, as if he couldn't believe that this was really what he wanted. The main character continued to tell that the guy was interested in the soft sand under his feet. He also wanted to see the camels that slowly wandered through the desert. Finally, the Sun Spear remembered that he was truly interested in the world regardless of the good and evil of all people. This fact was impossible to deny. Then Zhu Donghun asked if that wasn't enough to start a new life. Sun Spear didn't know the answer to that question, but it seemed like he really wanted it to be enough. Zhu Donghun continued to say that he couldn't actually fully empathize with the pain the boy felt because he only felt part of it. Therefore, he did not want to hastily express the feelings that the Sun Spear was experiencing because he believed that he should not have done so. Now the necromancer was interested in whether the guy couldn't be honest with his desires and not pay attention to the grievances he felt towards people. The main character asked the guy to just think about the fact that he could go see the world. Zhu's words for a moment Donghun Sun Spear suddenly asked if he really meant to say that he could show him the world. Without a moment's hesitation, the main character confirmed this because he was after all a necromancer. The guy said that even though he was a damned necromancer, he was still a magician who controlled death. The main character also claimed that the world in which he lived was completely different from the one in which the solar spear lived. Next, Zhu Donghun extended his hand to his opponent again and invited him to show him his world. Sun Spear began to become noticeably nervous because this was the first time he had ever experienced anything like this, and therefore he was very afraid to trust anyone. At the same time, the main character smiled sincerely and offered the guy to take his hand and serve him. The system then notified Zhu Donghun said that the Sun Spear was in deep thought and was thinking hard about his proposal. Before giving his answer, the guy decided to ask the main character something. He asked if Zhu was different Donghun from other people. This question discouraged the guy. Meanwhile, Sun Spear gripped his weapon tightly in his hand and declared that he was the absolute ruler of the ancient desert empire. He was also a half-man half-beast who had no equal in this world and a spear that conquered the high sun. Once again pointing his weapon at the main character, the guy declared that he did not serve anyone. Especially the solar spear was not going to serve someone who was human. Then the guy asked in a stern voice if the main character was ready to become his master. At this point, the system notified Zhu Donghun about activating a secret quest according to which the guy had to prove that he was a true master. To this, the main character only smiled and thought that he had no other choice but to become the master of the solar spear. That is why the main character, using his abilities, turned the necromancer's staff into a spear and prepared to pass the test. With a smile on Zhu's face, Donghun confidently stated that he was ready to prove that he was a true master, but he did not know what to do. Sun Spear explained that the boy only needed to take his attack and experience the true power of the sun, and not just the remnants of resentment. Zhu Donghun agreed with these conditions, so he asked the guy to attack when he was ready. At that very moment, the solar spear pushed off the ground with force and headed towards the main character with lightning speed. The guy was going to put all his strength skills and resentment towards people into this attack in order to check whether Zhu was Donghun is worthy of being called his master. The main character remained firmly standing in place while the danger approached him at great speed. Of course, the necromancer was very worried, but he could no longer retreat. The next moment 2 spears collided in battle, causing a bright flash. The bright light literally blinded the main character, so he had to quickly cover his eyes with his hands. As soon as the guy opened his eyes, he saw that he was in the middle of the desert. There was no ancient pyramid or any enemies in sight anywhere. Suddenly, a familiar voice was heard behind the guy saying that he expected nothing else from his student. The satisfied master of all techniques congratulated the protagonist on his victory and on the fact that he had resolved the grievance of the solar spear. Next, the system notified Zhu Donghun that his pain resistance skill had been upgraded to rank A and had potential for further development. After that, Zhu Donghun, he replied that it was not his abilities that were important to the solar spear, so in that case, he was ready to happily fight him again and again. The protagonist recalled that after he repelled his opponent's attack, he lowered the solar spear into his bloody weapon. The guy admitted that the main character really was a different person. Moreover, he said that he sincerely wanted to be reborn. That is why the solar spear obediently fell to its knees before the main character. Then the guy said that he recognized Zhu Donghun as his master. After this, the necromancer finally received the long-awaited message that he had fulfilled the hidden conditions and completed the dungeon for which he was to receive a reward. Meanwhile, in the real world, a festive banquet was taking place in one of the establishments. The guests chatted happily with each other and discussed the latest news while waiting for the main part of the event. However, some people didn't want to be here right now. Ji Soyul stood alone, sighing heavily, thinking about how sad it was here. She attended the event only at her brother's request, but quickly realized it was a waste of time. The Dark Empress thought she could endure all this because she had a chance to interact with the rankers. However, compared to the old man she met in the dungeon, all the rankers who were here were just babies. That was why Ji Soyul was now hoping that this event would end soon and she would finally be able to leave. Suddenly, someone turned to the girl to attract her attention. The Dark Empress immediately looked away. She saw a young guy who, with a smile on his face, claimed that he was looking for her because they had not seen each other for a long time. He also felt awkward when he asked if Ji Soyul remembered him. The annoying guy asked the Dark Empress if she remembered the ranker he had befriended when he went to America last time. Says with a smile that this ranker really wanted to meet Ji Soyul. That is why he was interested in whether the girl wanted to arrange a meeting and offered to drink an exclusive whiskey released in a limited edition. All this did not interest Ji Soyul at all, so in this conversation she was completely indifferent and was only looking for an excuse to leave. To do this, the Dark Empress looked at her watch in the hope that she could already leave. Then she told her interlocutor that she would only stay until the end of the day because she had a preliminary meeting scheduled. The guy tried to persuade the girl to stay longer because the party had just begun. Despite this, Ji Soyul still turned around and left, having politely thanked the guy for keeping her company. The guy had no choice but to say goodbye to his interlocutor and silently watch her go. Soon after, he frowned as he was very unhappy with this conversation. The guy was angry and thought about how arrogant this girl was. He thought that the fact that she was a ranker did not make her so special. He then suggested that the rumors that had been circulating recently about Ji Soyul hiding her boyfriend were true. In the end, the guy decided that he should follow the Dark Empress and check everything. After some time, the portal in the forest began to glow brightly and make a loud sound. A dark silhouette attempted to return to the real world after successfully completing the dungeon. It was Zhu Donghun, who was very tired after his special adventure and was currently breathing heavily. The guy carelessly threw his staff on the ground because he was no longer able to hold it in his hands. After this, the main character himself fell to the ground, simultaneously rejoicing that he did not die in this dungeon. Then he turned his attention to the sky and saw that the sun had not yet set, which meant that he had not spent that long in the other world. After this, the main character thought that Ans should have returned soon because all his affairs should have taken no more than 6 hours. Unexpectedly, Zhu Donghun received a system notification that all of his skeletons had been restored. Looking at the characteristics of his subordinates, the guy saw that all the skeletons' indicators had increased. Among all the skeletons, the one who wielded the spear stood out in particular. Now he had the name of the solar spear. This skeleton inherited the memory and will of the solar spear, so now, unlike the others, it became special, which pleased the necromancer. After that, the system notified the guy that the skeleton spearman was changing to a solar spear, due to which all his indicators were increased by 10 units. Zhu Donghun was amazed because his subordinate had obtained the same fighting skills that the Sun Spear had used against him in battle. The first of these skills was the blindingly shining solar combo. The second skill was Raging Desert, which covered the entire battlefield with a sandstorm-like attack. The third skill was Soul Flame, which burned the soul to temporarily increase movement and attack speed. All these skills were incredible, which made the main character very happy, but there was one problem. Zhu Donghun couldn't continue calling his subordinate just a skeleton. He decided to call him Solar, feeling that Solar Spear sounded too disrespectful. After that, the guy decided to get a reward for completing the dungeon. In addition to various achievements and leveling up, the main character unexpectedly received the item Golden Random Box. The main character was amazed by this award and did not expect to receive it at all because it was an S-rank item. The guy was only an A-rank hunter and had never received such valuable items before. Now he had an item of the highest rank in his hands, which was very hard to believe. Next, the system asked if the necromancer wanted to open a random golden box. Without thinking about this question at all, the guy agreed with admiration and began to carefully watch what would happen. The next moment, the valuable item flew into the air and began to emit a bright light. The opening process began. Soon after, the dark silhouette of the object that the protagonist received from this golden box began to appear. The system congratulated Zhu Donghun, received an S-rank item, and handed it over to the guys. It turned out that it was a magic staff that was imbued with the power of the legendary Red Dragon. It increased life force by 100 units, reduced the duration of skills, and increased the power of fire attribute skills. The main character really liked the fact that this item increased his vitality, but he was also pleased with the other effects. The boy believed that if this staff was used correctly, it could be made more destructive by increasing the user's strength. After this, the main character took out his smartphone to check how much this item could cost on the market. The necromancer went into a special application and asked on the forum how much this item could cost without forgetting to indicate all its characteristics. Despite all the expectations for a clear answer, forum users were in no hurry to help because they believed that Zhu Donghun was just drawing attention to himself since he was only an A-rank mercenary. In order to prove to the commentators that he was not lying and actually received such a valuable item, as a reward, Zhu Donghun decided to record a video and upload it to the forum. After this, everyone believed the main character, but they thought that this object was very strange because it had unusual characteristics. In just a few seconds, the news about the appearance of an unusual S-rank item appeared on all bulletin boards and took the leading positions. Zhu Donghun didn't expect such an effect from a simple question on the internet and hoped that the forum had good protection, thanks to which his personal information would not be made public. Soon after, the guy started receiving messages from people wanting to buy the unusual staff. In order not to attract any more attention to himself, the necromancer deleted his post. Although this whole situation turned out to be quite stressful for the main character, it nevertheless gave him one thought. Zhu Donghun, I realized that there was no rule that said he had to use this item. In any case, the guy's life force was fully restored, so he could check something right now. Without wasting any time, the necromancer used the staff of the fire dragon to summon the awakened skeleton. The main character's subordinate immediately appeared. As usual, 10 units of life force were spent for this. This subordinate was a skeleton mage to whom the main character had one task. Suddenly, the boy handed the skeleton his valuable staff and asked him to take it. The subordinate was very surprised, so he did not immediately carry out the necromancer then Zhu's order. Donghun stated that it was a gift. These words instantly shocked the skeleton mage. He could not speak, but even without words, it was clear that he was very pleased with this valuable gift. The main character handed his subordinate a valuable item and asked him to take it for himself because it was a gift. The skeleton mage immediately took the staff and began to rejoice very much at his new weapon, while Zhu Donghun watched this from the side. After that, the system notified the guy that the skeleton mage was equipped with a fire dragon staff. This message surprised the necromancer very much, as if such a thing simply could not happen. The thing was that usually the undead necromancer couldn't equip items, but this time it somehow happened. Now the main character didn't understand what he had to do because this was his first and only S-rank item. Zhu Donghun had two options on what he should do. The first of them was, of course, to give this weapon to the skeleton mage, who really liked it. The second option involved the usual sale of this valuable and unusual item which could solve the money problem for a long time. Meanwhile, the skeleton continued to rejoice at the gift from the necromancer and demonstrated it in every possible way. Zhu Donghun saw this and started say that this item was very expensive, so it was better for the skeleton to give it to him. To this, Zhu's subordinate Donghuna began to turn his head from side to side, as if he was refusing to fulfill the necromancer's request. The protagonist had no intention of insisting on the return of this valuable weapon, so he only sighed heavily when he received a refusal. After that, the main character said that it was better than nothing and hoped that the skeleton mage would be able to use this weapon. The guy then suggested that perhaps the skeleton would one day be able to achieve true awakening as a solar spear, and then all this would not be in vain. The necromancer also decided to check what reward he received for completing the mission. It turned out that it was an item called the Root of Racial Conflict. The system notified the guy that this item was related to his profession. Zhu Donghun didn't understand this connection at all. After looking at the characteristics of this item, it turned out that it was a catalyst that opened a dungeon called Forest and Stone. Zhu Donghun was surprised that he was lucky enough to receive a catalyst as a reward again, because he remembered Ji Soy Yul's words well. The girl said that the catalyst was a kind of fateful opportunity. According to her, as the main character progresses further, he will have interconnected tasks. This chain of quests will increase the guy's rank and eventually lead him to reach S rank and even higher. Now Zhu Donghun seriously wondered if this dungeon could be connected to his other skeletons like it was with the Sun Spear. The necromancer suggested that it was possible that all 10 skeletons he had were absolute beings from their worlds. The main character also thought about whether all this would make his profession too powerful. Now the guy had a feeling as if a mysterious system favored only him. Zhu Donghun quickly dismissed these thoughts because he felt that he had been thinking too much about the wrong things. The guy reminded himself that his main goal was to become a ranker and enter the list of the best. That's why Zhu Donghun I thought that in that case he had to use the system to its maximum himself. The skeleton was one of the most basic creatures that a novice necromancer could summon. This creature was an undead creature with only bones remaining in its entire body. In general, it was an undead creature that had nothing at all except bones. However, the skeleton spearman now called Sunny could magically speak coherently and address his master. Zhu, this was the first time Donghun had the opportunity to talk to his subordinate, which made the moment a little surprising and exciting. Sunspear looked at the night sky and was surprised that he could actually see something that was not easy to explain. Also, the main character considered it a little illogical that a skeleton without nerves and muscles could walk and fight, but this should be taken as a given. At that moment, the guy heard someone's footsteps behind him. Someone was slowly approaching him. It turned out that it was Ji Soy Yul who, without hiding her interest in what was happening, said that it was really exciting. The girl continued to say that a talking skeleton was such a rare sight that other necromancers would be speechless if they witnessed it. Unexpectedly, the main character demanded that the Dark Empress not call his subordinate a skeleton. Zhu Donghun say that this creature was one, and only so it should only be called the Solar Spear. Then the main character asked if the girl was sure that she could stay here. Ji Soy Yul asked the guy not to worry, and assured him that she would protect him until he became stronger. The unexpected girl added that she would only do this until the necromancer reached rank A. These words discouraged the guy. The Dark Empress explained that by reaching this rank, the main character will already be able to take care of himself and will also be able to join one of the major guilds without any problems. The girl was also sure that with Zhu's current growth rate Donghuna, this whole journey won't take long. The main character was very doubtful that the girl was right because he was still a drank hunter. To this, Ji Soy Yul said that she couldn't believe it because when they first met, the guy was a porter of about rank D. However, now looking at the skeletons, one could say that they were already close to the power levels of rank B. And Zhu himself, Donghun, improved every day. Then the main character had the idea that if his subordinate was an absolute being who ruled the whole world, then by returning his former strength, he could become even stronger. That's why the guy asked the Solar Spear if he didn't need to personally supervise his training. The skeleton replied that he himself could hone his spear technique. The subordinate continued to say that although it was a fragile and weak body, he would try to quickly restore his original strength to help his master. Zhu Donghun agreed with all of this, so he allowed the skeleton to train on his own. The subordinate promised that he would not let the guy down. After that, Sun Spear began to swing his weapon in order to get used to his new body and regain his skills. The main character watched the skeleton training from the side and thought about when his rank would increase. The guy was worried about this question because he could only use the catalyst when he reached rank C and above. This meant that there was some way to reach this rank. Now the necromancer knew that his next goal was to reach rank C and go to the dungeon forest and stone. After some time, the main character returned to his home and for some reason built a wall of stone blocks in the middle of the room. Ji Soyul, seeing all this, said that the guy didn't have to go that far. Zhu Donghun, he explained that the girl was helping him, so it was wrong that she slept on the roof of the house every time. The necromancer asked the Dark Empress not to worry and promised that he would never cross the line. Zhu Donghun happened to say that the girl, like yesterday, could spread out her sleeping bag and sleep on the floor. Having said this, the guy immediately thought that whoever his guest was, he could not give him his only mattress. The main character believed that comfortable sleep was very important, so he could not do this. Meanwhile, Ji Soyul claimed that the guy shouldn't have gone that far for this. Zhu Donghun didn't understand what the girl was talking about and claimed that they should have clearly explained such things. Then the necromancer thought that he was still considered one of the weak ones in this society of hunters, so he did not want anyone to find out that he had treated the Dark Empress badly. The main character was afraid to even imagine what would happen to him when Ji Soyul's brother found out that he forced her to sleep on the street. These thoughts were interrupted by the girl, who said that the main character misunderstood her. Looking the guy straight in the eyes, Ji Soyul explained that she meant this division and believed that it was not worth going that far. Zhu Donghun was very surprised by the girl's statement, which even made him a little embarrassed. Ji Soyul continued to say that if she wanted, there wouldn't even be such a section. Looking sternly at the main character, the Dark Empress declared that if she had entered, his head would have fallen off in an instant. These words scared Zhu very much. Donghun therefore had no intention of even checking them. Then the girl smiled good-naturedly and clarified that she meant that it was useless. Despite this, the necromancer was still very worried and wondered if Ji Soyul really spent all her time thinking about how to kill people. Suddenly, our conversation was shockingly interrupted by a loud knock on the door, which announced the arrival of an uninvited guest. Ji Soyul and Zhu Donghun was very surprised because they weren't expecting anyone at such a time. Meanwhile, the knocking on the door continued. Along the way, a female voice was heard asking the owner of the apartment to talk to her. Zhu Donghun didn't understand who it could be because at this hour he wasn't expecting any guests. Still, the guy thought that he could open the door because if it was a high-ranking hunter, then Ji Soyul would have noticed it first. Still, the main character opened the door, and the first thing he asked was who this man was. The guy saw a young girl in front of him who was crying. He immediately assumed that it was one of the residents of his house. Without explaining anything, the girl quickly clarified whether her interlocutor was a guy named Zhu Donghun. This question surprised the necromancer, because he did not understand how this girl could know him. The next moment, the girl, with tears in her eyes, began to beg the protagonist to save her brother. Zhu Donghun was shocked by this and the request because he didn't understand how he was connected to this and what was happening at all. In order to explain everything, the girl gave the guy a message that was left in her house. The main character began to carefully study what was depicted on this sheet of paper. The first thing he noticed was a photograph of a tied-up man who was apparently the girl's brother. The text said that the main character had to come to the Han River today before 8 o'clock in the evening. The kidnappers also threatened to kill the guy if all this was reported to the association. After reading, Zhu Donghun immediately thought that only the group of hidden shadows could do such a thing. Ji Soyul was surprised by this situation because she didn't think that the enemies would act so openly. Meanwhile, the girl who brought the message could not believe that the very same Dark Empress was standing in front of her. She did not expect to see her here at all. Despite this, Ji Soyul continued to say that the kidnappers' methods were exactly the same as those of the Hidden Shadow Group, and she assumed that all of this happened because she stayed close to Zhu. To top it all off, the Dark Empress just received word that the second squad had been ambushed by a hellhound. The Dark Empress's brother asked her not to worry because he would try to deal with everything quickly, but he would not refuse her help either. Zhu Donghun knew that the hellhound was Nick Zaken, who was known as the master of the Hidden Shadow Group. Ji Soy Yul realized that the villains were attacking on two fronts at once. The Dark Empress was very unhappy with this whole situation because now she had to make a choice. Zhu Donghun saw this and assumed that the girl was very worried about her brother and the Parang Guild, but she still stayed here because of her promise. That is why the main character, without thinking twice, said that they had no other choice and it was better for the Dark Empress to go help her guild for now. Ji Soy Yul immediately replied that she couldn't do that, after which she insisted that her brother was ranked 58th. That's why she believed that the guy wasn't so weak that he could be destroyed by some small group of hidden shadows. At the same time, the main character was all alone, so it was unknown what would happen to him when Ji Soy Yul left. Zhu Donghun agreed with this statement, but he believed that they initially needed to rescue the kidnapped person. Looking again at the piece of paper, the necromancer insisted that the kidnappers asked him to come to the meeting place alone. Ji Soy Yul immediately stated that it was a trap by Zhu Donghun already knew about it. However, the main character thought that everything was not so bad because the Hellish End was now busy with the Parang Guild and its leader. In addition, on the side of the main character were the Master of all techniques and the Solar Spear, who were very strong warriors. In order to convince the Dark Empress, Zhu Donghun decided to remind her of her own words. The guy said that life is a journey that began with connections and ended with connections. The guy was not at all happy with the fact that the person who was connected to him was now suffering because of him. Zhu Donghun stood his ground and said that he simply couldn't just stand by and watch what was happening. The main character didn't want to be a cowardly hunter, so he wasn't going to just sit at home until everything was over. Moreover, the necromancer intended to give back everything he received. After hearing all this, Ji Soy Yul finally agreed with the protagonist. The girl decided that she would first go to the Parang Guild and quickly sort out her affairs and then join the necromancer. Unexpectedly, the Dark Empress reminded the main character that last time she promised to introduce him to many connections. Smiling slyly, the girl suggested that now it would happen much faster. The next moment, Ji Soy Yul literally disappeared as if she had never been there. Zhu Donghun was shocked by what he saw and didn't understand what kind of skill the girl had just used. Besides, now he was haunted by Ji Soy Yul's words about being acquainted with many connections. Meanwhile, it was late evening. The sun had long since set behind the horizon, but this did not stop the river from continuing its movement. There was absolutely no one around, and only the sound of water could be heard, and the lampposts barely illuminated the street. In the midst of this silence, the steps of the man who had business here could be clearly heard. He silently walked up to the tied-up man he had recently kidnapped and checked to make sure he was motionless. After this, one of the members of the Hidden Shadow group looked at his watch. It was already almost 8 o'clock in the evening, which made it seem like his wait was useless. However, the villain still warned his subordinates that the main character would soon be here. At that moment, the footsteps of another man were heard, who was walking accompanied by his skeleton. Zhu Donghun was completely serious and unperturbed because he was going to sort this matter out as quickly as possible so that no innocent person would get hurt. The members of the Hidden Shadow group, upon seeing the main character, immediately tensed up and prepared for the fact that a battle could begin at any moment. Meanwhile, the leader of this small group grabbed his hostage and showed him to the necromancer, showing that he was safe and sound. After that, he casually threw the man to the ground right at the protagonist's feet, as if allowing him to be taken away. A frightened man saw Zhu Donghun, immediately started trying to tell him something, but he couldn't because his mouth was covered with a bandage. This made the villain laugh, after which he was ready to start a dialogue with the main character. The man was surprised that the guy actually came and said that he had no shortage of courage, but judging by the summoned skeletons, it was only a low-ranking necromancer standing in front of him. At the same time, Zhu Donghun looked at his opponents and thought that they were rank hunters, but perhaps there were brank hunters among them. Suddenly, one of the villains took out his knife and said that the main character should have known better than him why he was called here. Zhu Donghun looked closely at his opponents and thought that they were rank hunters, but perhaps there were brank hunters among them. Suddenly, one of the villains took out his knife and said that the main character should have known better than him why he was called here. To this, the guy calmly replied that he didn't know the reason and simply came to the place that was indicated in the note. The necromancer also reminded that the villains should have left this man alive if he came here. The leader of the Hidden Shadow group was very unhappy that Zhu Donghun pretended he didn't know anything. In order to persuade the main character to cooperate, the villain sharply directed his hand towards his hostage. Putting a knife to the man's throat, the leader of the group of villains demanded that the guy tell him in detail what kind of opportunity he had been given and tell him. He then threatened that if Dong-hun doesn't do this, the hostage will die. Despite his outward calm, the main character was now very excited because he only had 5 drank skeletons at his disposal. That's why the guy now simply didn't know what to do. To be on the safe side, he took his necromancer's staff in his hand. The situation for Zhu, it was very difficult for Dong-hun because his opportunity to become a ranker was not something that could be given to someone. Nevertheless, the guy said that he would tell the scoundrels everything just so that they would not harm the hostage. The group of hidden shadows praised the necromancer for being willing to cooperate with them to save his life and the man's. To this, Zhu Dong-hun bowed respectfully and thanked the scoundrels for giving him a chance to live. Then the main character with a smile on her face stated that his opportunity was very simple. The guy honestly told that he had a master who taught him various techniques. The leader of the villains was surprised to hear this and immediately clarified whether the necromancer really meant that old man whom even Ji Soyul could not defeat. Zhu Dong-hun, he replied that this old man was such a powerful master that the Dark Empress challenged him dozens of times but was defeated each time. The scoundrel learned about this, but hearing this again was still surprising to him. He could not believe that such a master really existed. Then the leader of the group asked where this master was. He was worried that only the necromancer could see the old man because in that case he was useless to them. Zhu Dong-hun immediately replied that indeed only he could see him, however, there was a special technique that would make the master visible to everyone. The guy also said, smiling good-naturedly, that he could share the master's power with all the scoundrels. The members of the group of hidden shadows were amazed that I would not only be able to see the master but also be lucky enough to learn from him. Zhu Dong-hun confidently confirmed this and added that this was why the Dark Empress always stayed by his side. The leader of the villains immediately asked if the protagonist could show them the master of all techniques right now. This without a moment's hesitation, but asked the scoundrels to be patient for about 30 minutes to cast the spell and prepare everything. Of course, everything was not so simple, and this time was not chosen by chance. When the main character was running to the meeting place, he suddenly received a message. It was a message from Ji Soyul asking that the boy not even try to fight the kidnappers alone. The girl also said that at her request, the connections she promised to introduce him to would definitely come to his aid. However, Zhu Dong-hun didn't need to rush since support would only arrive in 30 minutes. The necromancer, seeing this message, realized that he somehow needed to hold out for half an hour and prevent the battle. That's why the guy now kindly addressed the scoundrels and asked which of them wanted to be first. The leader of the hidden shadow group was in no hurry to put forward his candidacy because it was not yet certain that Zhu was there. Dong-hun wasn't lying. At the same time, the main character smiled slyly and thought that the die had already been cast. Now the villains had a choice whether to give in to their greed or not. Some time passed. The leader of the group of hidden shadows nervously tapped his foot on the ground because he was already tired of this tedious wait. The villain was unhappy that the guy who claimed to grant them his ability had been reading the spell for more than 30 minutes. Nevertheless, the man waited obediently and remembered that the same thing had happened last time. Then the situation was of course different, but the main character was also stalling for time just like now, so the villain began to suspect that the guy was up to something. That is why, unable to bear this agonizing wait, the leader of the group of hidden shadows turned to the necromancer with displeasure. The man asked if the main character would soon finish his preparations because there was a limit to how long they could wait. Zhu Dong-hun calmly replied that if the villains continued to interrupt him, he would lose concentration and then he would have to start all over again. After this, the main character, smiling slyly, asked if the men were nervous. These words clearly touched the members of the hidden shadow group, causing them to become very angry. However, the guy asked the men not to be afraid because they could at any moment abandon their intentions. The angry leader of the group considered the necromancers simply crazy since he allowed himself to be rude to them. In order to show the seriousness of his intentions, the scoundrel again took his sharp dagger in his hand. He then grabbed the hostage tightly and held the weapon to his throat, causing a small wound. Zhu Dong-hun, seeing this, asked with displeasure what the man had called himself. The villain explained that the guy had broken his promise when he said that the preparation would take 30 minutes, so now he was allowed to take the man's life. The leader of the group asked the main character not to blame him because the guy himself was to blame for what would happen. This unpredictable situation made the necromancer nervous. The villain was already ready to carry out his plans, but he heard a strange sound that quickly became louder. Looking to the side, the leader of the group of hidden shadows saw the danger that was approaching him. The next moment, right next to the man, a spear was thrust into the ground, which almost killed the villain. The man had to quickly retreat back, forgetting about his hostage. Then he began to look around, intently trying to understand who attacked him. The only thing the villain suspected was the skeleton that came here with the main character. The leader of the hidden shadow group couldn't believe that a mere skeleton could carry out such an attack. Zhu Donghun felt very sorry that his opponent was able to dodge this attack, but he couldn't help but admit that it impressed him. The main character calmly asked if the man had really been waiting for this all this time, and he also thanked the scoundrel for giving him enough time. The leader of the group of villains was very unhappy that the necromancer dared to mock him. That is why the man, without wasting time, used his abilities to call several more killers to his aid. Along the way, the scoundrel asked if the guy really thought that one skeleton with a few tricks up his sleeve would be enough to turn the situation around. After this, the leader of the hidden shadow group ordered all his subordinates to kill the hostage and capture the main character. The man wished that Zhu Donghun paid dearly for deceiving them and wasting their time. In order to stop the villain, the first to attack was the solar spear, who was determined to protect his master. The skeleton deftly dodged all the daggers flying at him and tried to make sure that none of them hit the main character. This allowed the necromancer to remain safe and prepare for his next move. Finally, the boy picked up his necromancer staff and used the summoning skill. At that very moment, a group of armed skeletons appeared on the battlefield and without a moment's hesitation ran towards the villains. Zhu Donghun smiled slyly and ordered his subordinates to destroy the group of hidden shadows.